The Israeli bombardment has now paused. Hostages could soon be reunited with their families. And nearly 90 Palestinian prisoners will also be freed as part of the agreement. We'll be live from the West Bank. Hundreds of aid trucks are also preparing to cross the border, the region holding its breath as we build up to the moment the hostages leave Gaza. Well, hello, good afternoon. And after 15 months of war and a nearly 3-hour-long delay here this morning, a long-awaited ceasefire is now underway in Gaza. It came into effect at 11:15 local time after Israel received the names of 3 hostages who will be released by Hamas this afternoon. Well, 33 hostages will be released in this first phase of the deal. 3 are due to be released any time from now. They are 28-year-old Emily Damari, a dual British-Israeli citizen who was abducted from kibbutz Kfar Aza on October the 7th. Romi Gonen, the 24-year-old, was shot as she was taken hostage from the Supernova Music Festival in the south of Israel. And Doron Steinbrecher, a 31-year-old veterinary nurse, was also taken from kibbutz Kfar Aza on October the 7th. Let's show you live pictures then from Gaza. It is now being reported that the International Committee of the Red Cross, their ambulances are now on their way to pick up the 3 female hostages waiting to be released. Let's get the latest with our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who is here with me in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. It is a process we saw in November 2023 when hostages were freed. But talk us through what we can expect to happen this afternoon.
What we are seeing now on various media channels are a convoy of Red Cross 4x4 vehicles with the flag of the Red Cross flying on them, driving through Gaza. Now, the Prime Minister's office here in Israel has said that the hostages are not yet in the care of the Red Cross, but the Red Cross are on the way to collect them. So the process, the handover process, is now, we think, underway. I think what is important to remember at this moment is for the hostages, they could well be totally unaware of what is going on, what has been agreed, and what is happening today. I've spoken to released hostages in the past who have described the moment of release, the day of their release, as being almost the most frightening moment during their time in captivity. Some of them felt that at that moment they were taking to be executed. They didn't know what was going on, because whilst we in Israel and the outside world are aware of what is happening right now, the hostages have been kept perhaps underground, perhaps in houses or in apartments in Gaza, and they are now going to be transferred to the custody of the Red Cross, who will then in turn take them to the Israeli-Gaza border and hand them over to the Israeli military.
Yes, and certainly Israeli television here are showing those Red Cross ambulances in the dust of Gaza, making their way through as the light fades on this day that is proving so historic. And as you say, for 3 female hostages, soon to have what must feel like such a release from the captivity they've had for 15 months, not knowing if they will live or die under the bombardment from the skies of Israeli bombs and artillery. For them soon meeting their families, and for 3 of the 33 in this first phase, you know, that sense of release, of hope finally realized.
I've just spent the last hour with a lady called Emily Cohen, who is great friends with Mandy Damari, the mother of Emily Damari, and she's not daring to hope yet. But when we were with her, the news came through that the process of transfer was underway, and it was overwhelming for them. She spoke to some of Emily Damari's family, some of them back home in the United Kingdom, some of them here, and they are just waiting for that official confirmation that Emily and the other two hostages have been handed over and they're safely in the custody of the Israeli military until that moment is confirmed. And let's remember, they still don't know whether or not these three hostages, these three young women, are alive. The assumption is that they are, but until there is confirmation that they are back on Israeli soil, people here aren't quite yet daring to believe that this is happening. But, you know, they are very close to the families themselves here in Hostage Square, around Israel and around the world, have been campaigning tirelessly for their release. They've been keeping it in the public eye, in the international eye, in order that the fate of the hostages is not forgotten. But it does look now as though the process is underway and we could be close to that moment of release.
Just hearing from our colleagues in America, actually, that Joe Biden will deliver remarks on the hostages and the release today at 3:30 this afternoon, UK time, from Charleston in South Carolina. How important will it be for him that hostages, albeit only three, came home on his watch?
Well, this is the fruits of many, many hours and months that the Biden administration have put in trying to negotiate this deal. Critics of America will accuse them of being too soft on the Israelis throughout the last 15 and a half months, of being too soft on Benjamin Netanyahu, and Donald Trump, who is inaugurated tomorrow, is already and will claim some of the credit for pushing this hostage deal through and getting it over the line. But for Joe Biden, I'm sure he and his team, Tony Blinken, Brett McGurk and others, will feel a degree of satisfaction that they finally got there, even though it's happening only in their last few hours left in office in Washington. But the process going forward, and this is only day one of the first phase, that will be partly the responsibility for the new Trump administration to take on. And despite their political differences, we've seen Brett McGurk, Biden's point man for the Middle East, working very closely with Stephen Witkoff, Trump's point man for the Middle East, over the last week or so, mainly in Doha, in order to try and bring this deal together and to get to this moment where the first hostages start coming out.
Alistair, stand by. Obviously, certainly it feels it is underway. Those images we can see of those international Red Cross vehicles driving, as I said, through the dust, presumably in Gaza, waiting to meet those Hamas representatives who have been holding those three hostages that we are waiting to see. Romi Gonen, Emily Damari, and of course Doron Steinbrecher. I spoke to her cousin, Michal Mayo, pretty much on this spot actually, on October the 7th, the anniversary of which last year. She apparently cried when she heard the confirmation that her cousin had been freed. The last she'd heard of Doron was on day 107. Hamas had released a video in which she described Doron as looking terrible. It made her more concerned about her. It has been so torturous for some of those families. Let's listen to what some of them had to say.
The only thing we have is the video from October 7th when he was brutally abducted by Hamas terrorists, and we saw him walking over the border through the concrete walls into Gaza. And this is the last life sign we have of Tamir. This is not the deal we've hoped for. We hope for that maybe that the deal will be in stages, but it will be completed at the beginning, and all the terms would be agreed in the beginning. And as we know, only on the 16th day they will start discussing the second phase, and I'm very worried.
Carmel was taken on October 7th. Her mother was murdered in Kibbutz Be'eri, and she was taken captive from there. And she stayed with two youngsters for 50 days. She became sort of their guardian angel in captivity, doing yoga sessions with them in captivity. That's what they told us when they came back. they said she saved their lives. That's why we do Yoga for Carmel here every Friday morning, reminding the world that there's still a hostage in captivity, doing yoga for the sake of others, trying to save their lives in captivity. Unfortunately, on the 328th day, she was with 5 other hostages. The beautiful 6 were together in the same tunnel, and all of them were shot because, what we understand is their guards thought that an IDF force was approaching, and they decided to just get rid of the 6 of them and run away.
Tal was in Kibbutz Nir Yitzchak on the morning of October 7th. As the sirens blew, everybody went into the safe room in their home, as well as Tal's family. And then once there was word on infiltrators trying to get into the kibbutz, Tal went out. His wife took all the house furniture, put it in front of their homes because their safe room didn't lock because they never thought there's actually a need for that. And she took 2 large kitchen knives, her 3 young children, and just waited. We later learned that Tal was murdered that morning when he confronted the terrorists, and his body was taken to Gaza. And it took about 2 months until we got final confirmation that he was actually dead. And we've been waiting for him ever since.
We received 2 proofs of life. The first one was in November of 23, when the first deal between Israel and Hamas was executed. A few hostages reported they saw Marie in the tunnels. They also told us he learned that Lisha and Gol survived October 7th during his captivity, and that gave him a lot of strength. And then in late April, Hamas released a psychological warfare video featuring him and another hostage, Keith Siegel. And we were focusing then not on how unwell he looked, and definitely not on the words that Hamas put in his mouth, but rather on the fact he is alive. It gave us a lot of strength to continue our advocacy work worldwide, and of course with our own elected officials in Israel. And we hope he'll return to us. We assume he's alive. We haven't received any other indication.
It's been something of a roller coaster ride of emotions, from the announcement on Wednesday to things looking like they might fall apart on Thursday and Friday, then the deal being approved. But we've reached day 1 of this 6-week period. We just hope to see the first 3 hostages finally walk onto Israeli soil later on this afternoon, and then we can perhaps start to truly believe that it will progress and that we will get Ellie back for our family. If anything has been taught to us over the last 6, 8, 12 months, is to not believe anything until you see it happen with your own eyes. So I've always felt, as this deal started to come to fruition over the last few days, that it's a case of see it when I believe it. So still, even just a few hours away from this first release, I still am wary to believe that it's happening, and really want to see the 3 female hostages on Israeli soil before I'll really allow myself to have that little bit of celebration. Because although it's not Ellie that's coming out as yet, all of us hostage families are part of a fraternity that we're brought together by the most horrific of circumstance, but we share each other's joy and sorrow. And today I'll be sharing the joy of the families of the 3 hostages that are coming out.
The voices there of some of those families who have been through this torturous process, waiting for news for so many months of their loved ones who've been held by Hamas in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023. So to Gaza then, we know that 200 aid trucks are now massed on the border of Gaza at the Kerem Shalem crossing, waiting to come in, 20 of them carrying much needed fuel. So let's speak now to Amy Shalan, director of Makan, a Palestinian-led educational organisation, who joins us now. Clearly, this is a big day. We know 90 Palestinian prisoners are waiting to be freed as part of this exchange. We know that those aid trucks are waiting to come in to Gaza, which suffered more bombing and artillery fire earlier today. What is your feeling now that the ceasefire is underway?
Just a quick correction. Also, I'm chair of the British Palestinian Committee, not director. That's Sarah Husseini. But in terms of your question, a great relief, obviously, for our people whose courage has been very inspiring. I've been watching the journalists, 205 of whom have been killed in recent months as they've tried to report on the situation in Gaza. I've been watching the first responders, people walking through the rubble now, trying to return to their destroyed homes. And amidst of all of that, I think it's really essential that we have to focus on what has to happen for there to be a just and lasting peace, and not to forget that Gaza has been under a stifling siege since, for many, many years now, starting really in the early 1990s. It became very difficult for Palestinians and goods to enter or leave. But essentially, since 2007, they've been under a suffocating siege and naval blockade on Gaza, which has been repeatedly condemned by the UN and rights groups as collective punishment for the entire population and illegal. So what really we have to think about in coming to terms with looking at the agreement, where it's very clear that there could have been a halt to the bloodshed months ago, were it not for Israel's very clear policy of inflicting maximum devastation on the Palestinian people. And seeing that together with the US, the UK and other allies have really provided unflinching political and material support for the atrocities that have been carried out. And we've seen the deliberate targeting of civilians. We've seen the systematic dismantling of Gaza's infrastructure, its schools, its hospitals, its cultural institutions, mosques, churches, media outlets. And we've really seen that Israel's intent to destroy Palestinian life and society has been writ large. So the humanitarian needs have mounted to absolutely catastrophic levels, and meeting just a fraction of those needs is only going to be possible through a very rapid and massive scale-up of global humanitarian aid into the Strip. But with that, there also has to be an onus on the UK government and the international community at large to pursue accountability and the inalienable rights of Palestinians in order for this to be a lasting peace and a just peace.
Amy, we do now have pictures, actually, of the beginning of this exchange. Hostages on one side and Palestinian prisoners on the other, around 90 of those we understand to be freed. The convoy is underway. We actually see Israeli helicopters now landing, being shown on Israeli television too. We know that is part of the process, that the Israeli hostages will be handed over from Hamas to the International Committee of the Red Cross. So they will be driven towards the border, where they will be given over to the Israeli Defense Forces, and then on to reception centres that have been set up in both north, central and southern Gaza. As you can see, these images now coming through to us. What we don't know is when those Israeli hostages were first told that they would be freed. Clearly, they have to travel through Gaza. They may not have been told. There's a ceasefire underway, driven through the remnants of buildings that have been bombed so heavily as part of this 15-month campaign that we can see in these pictures. Taken to reception centres where they will be checked over, their condition assessed, both physically. Certainly earlier I spoke to the head of the medical team for the Hostages Families Forum, who said they may well have organ damage from the way they've been living, from nutritional demands as well. A full assessment will be made there. Their mental health will also be assessed, and then they will be flown by helicopter towards an Israeli hospital which has been standing by. Alistair Bunkel, I wonder if I could bring you in here. Just talk us through some of the pictures we've been seeing then.
Well, we've been seeing an Israeli military aircraft landing. I think it sounds like they'll be coming out of the Reim Netzarim corridor crossings. The Netzarim corridor is a passage in Gaza from east to west that the Israeli military have created. Well, they've certainly expanded in a very large way during their military operation, during their war. It pretty much dissects Gaza north to south, and it sounds like that will be used as the exit route for the Red Cross, International Red Cross vehicles, jeeps, to bring the hostages and to transfer them into the custody of the Israeli military. So those helicopters landing will be in preparation to then take them from that crossing to hospitals. We understand Sheba Hospital, which is just north of here, in Ramat Gan, which is just north of Tel Aviv. All three of the hostages we think will be going there. And that's where they will probably be first reunited with their families and then into the medical care of Israeli specialists to look after them in the coming days. I'm just looking out for some relatives and some family members of some of the hostages coming out. They are starting to now realize that this is a reality all day, particularly when the ceasefire was delayed this morning. You know, they were unsure what was going to happen. They should have been told last night that these three young women were going to be released. But Hamas didn't do that. Hamas said that it was as a result of technical field difficulties on the ground. But then the names were handed over to the Israelis, and the ceasefire went into force at 11:15, and now it looks like that process of transfer is underway. What we're not quite clear about is whether or not the ICRC, the International Committee for the Red Cross, is en route to collect the hostages, or whether the hostages are now in their custody. There's some mixed reports about that, but really the first step is for the hostages to be taken into the care of the Red Cross before they are then brought across the border.
Well, Amy Shalan, obviously at the same time, Palestinian prisoners will also be freed from Israeli detention, mainly women and children, we understand. Are you grateful that they are released? Because on the list in the first phase, some 735 prisoners in this first phase, of which 328 we understand. In fact, just looking at pictures of a helicopter taking off, it would appear. Yes, apologies, Amy, we're trying to react to these pictures. Yes, so a Palestinian prisoner release at the same time.
Yes, well, of course, it is relief to have prisoners released. There have been mass arrests of Palestinians throughout the months. As we know, there are many people don't know where they are. There are doctors, there are nurses, as you said, that there are children who have been held by Israel in Israeli prisons, and they've been arrested. I mean, there have been mass arrest campaigns by Israel way before this was happening. There were already many thousands of detainees in Israeli prisons historically over time. The question is what those Palestinians are returning to also. I mean, do they have homes to go to? Are there homes there? Are there families there? How many of them have lost their family members? I think you've been talking with a great deal of passion about the individual stories of the Israeli hostages, but Palestinians tend to be counted in numbers rather than as individuals who have been undergoing lifelong occupation and apartheid regime. And what we now need is a fundamental change in approach from the UK government and from the international community. We've seen absolute support for Israel's actions in Gaza, and while dismissing the rights of Palestinians under international law. And it's really imperative that we now see our elected representatives take decisive action that really holds Israel accountable and ends the UK's complicity in Israel's violations of international law. And that includes collective punishment via imprisonment. And a fundamental change in approach is really essential if this ceasefire is to be more than a brief pause in an ongoing war against the Palestinian people. For decades, the dominant political discourse in the global north has really situated Palestine within a conflict paradigm that fails to take into account the key historical facts and root causes. And as a result, Israel's been able to continue to colonize Palestinian land, to become more explicit about its expansionist goals, while the rhetoric of supposed peace really is requiring the oppressed to come to the table to be further oppressed. And that's been really deeply entrenched. So that we have a mindset now that makes occupation and apartheid and settler colonialism, even genocide, seem normal, instead of supporting Palestinians to end the horrifically abnormal conditions that they are living under and the structures of oppression that they face.
Amy Shalland, Chair of the British Palestinian Committee, thank you very much indeed. And Amy, lamenting the fact that Palestinian prisoners are dealt with as just numbers. Part of the problem has been that nobody knows exactly how many people have been taken from Gaza. We spoke to the Palestinian Prisoner Society yesterday, and they don't know if it's hundreds or thousands of people who've been taken from the Gaza Strip. Some of them, we've seen pictures, they're nearly naked, sat, they're taken away. What we do know is that part of phase one, our understanding is that 1,067 Palestinians who've been taken from Gaza will be freed as part of phase one. As I said, nobody knows their names, so it's hard for us to identify and individualize them as their names have not been released. Let me return to our correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's watching these pictures as they unfold. Certainly we were led to believe that we wouldn't see so many pictures this time, but the process is most firmly underway for these three women with this life-changing experience that they've experienced.
Yeah, I think we'll see pictures from within Gaza, November 2023, which is kind of really all we've got to compare it to. Hamas took images of them handing their fighters, handing the hostages over to the Red Cross. Obviously, people in Gaza take videos and upload them to social media. I'll just pause them because there's suddenly a round of applause that went up. I mean, this is Hostage Square, and people have gathered in large numbers this evening, as requested to do so by the Hostage and Families Forum, in order to watch on television these events unfold. I think we're now looking perhaps at images from Ramallah, perhaps from Gaza, certainly from the Palestinian side of things, but families and others have gathered here in order to watch the events play out in real time. So I think we will see, as I said, images from within Gaza, whether that's the International Red Cross, because we've been seeing pictures of their convoy of their jeeps. I'm sure there'll be pictures from Palestinian social media that come about, but I think that once they are in the hands of the Israeli military, it will be incredibly censored. They are going to be acutely aware that after 15 and a half months being kept hostage, these three young women and any other future releases, they will be, at best in a shaky way. At worst, they could be in an incredibly bad physical state, and they're not going to want to publicize that quickly. This is going to be a case of giving them privacy as much as they can do.
And what we don't know is if they've seen any daylight. Certainly I spoke to Daniel Lifshitz. His grandmother was freed 17 days after October the 7th because she was very poorly. And he said that the adrenaline allowed her to walk 40 meters up the tunnel to daylight to get out. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to. So they may well have been kept underground for most of this time. And they may well be now seeing daylight. It's the first stage of realizing their life is about to change.
So I saw her, I think, 48 hours after she was released in a hospital just behind where we're standing now. And she spoke so softly, so quietly, with very little strength. And I've spoken to her grandson Daniel as well over the last couple of days, and he reflected on the survival instinct that kept her going. And he knew that she was he knew that she recognized the enormity of her release when actually, in a funny way, her health started going downhill. That survival instinct, once she was back in Israel, left her, and that's when actually she started to become rather unwell. So it just goes to show the unpredictability of what faces the hostages coming out of Gaza. But, you know, we have to always keep reminding this, the many Palestinian prisoners who are being released as well. Many of those who have been kept in closed conditions without charge and for an indeterminate amount of time. I've been in the tunnels in Gaza, I've been in the cages where the Israeli military were convinced that hostages, they had DNA showing that hostages had been held in these cages. They are cramped, they are hot, there's very little air. Yes, you can see no daylight whatsoever. You can hear bombardment above you. You know that you're in something of a war zone, but you have very little realization of the outside world. And some of the hostages would have been kept underground, some will have been kept above ground, some will have been moved around a lot as the war has progressed, and Hamas and other groups will have had to have moved them to different places within Gaza as the Israeli military systematically has taken control of parts of Gaza.
Yes, indeed. We know 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced. Those hostages will also have been displaced as they've been moved down towards the Rafah area, no doubt, towards Khan Yunis as well. If you're just joining us here on Sky News, let us recap what has been certainly an eventful day. And after 15 months of war, a nearly 3-hour-long delay here this morning, a long-awaited ceasefire is now underway in Gaza, coming into effect at 11:15 local time, 9:15 in the UK, after Israel finally received the names of 3 hostages due to be released any moment now. Well, 33 hostages will be released in the first stage of this deal. 3 of them today. That process, it does appear, is underway. First of all, Emily Damari, as you can see, she is 28 years old. She was taken from kibbutz Kfar Aza. Her mother, Mandy, has campaigned for her release. Her mother, Mandy, is here in Israel. She says she cannot wait to hug her daughter. Romi Gonen, the 24-year-old hostage, was taken hostage from the Supernova Music Festival in the south of Israel. She was in a private car on the phone to her mother when she told her mother, "I've been shot. Everyone in the car has been shot." And Doron Steinbrecher, a 31-year-old veterinary nurse, was also taken from kibbutz Kfar Aza on October the 7th. So ambulances from the International Committee of the Red Cross are currently in Gaza for the 3 hostages to be handed over. These pictures showing the convoy travelling inside the Gaza Strip. We believe the hostages will then be transferred to Israel by a military helicopter before being checked over by medical staff. Also, around 90 Palestinian prisoners will be released from prisons in the West Bank. We don't yet know when that is due to happen. Well, a short while ago, we spoke to Emily Damari, the cousin of Tal Haimi, who was killed on October the 7th, and his body taken into Gaza by Hamas.
Tal was in kibbutz Nir Yitzchak on the morning of October 7th. As the sirens blew, everybody went into the safe room in their home, as well as Tal's family. And then once there was word on infiltrators trying to get into the kibbutz, Tal went out. His wife took all the house furniture, put it in front of their homes because their safe room didn't lock, because they never thought there's actually a need for that. And she took 2 large kitchen knives, her 3 young children, and just waited. We later learned that Tal was murdered that morning when he confronted the terrorists, and his body was taken to Gaza. And it took about 2 months until we got final confirmation that he was actually dead. And we've been waiting for him ever since because it changes nothing for us. Our grandparents are among the founders of the kibbutz. Tal was born there, was raised there. He chose to raise his family there. And he has to be back and find a final resting place in the grounds of the kibbutz where he lived his entire life.
But this is the great fear, isn't it? How many of these hostages are actually alive? And the point is, people just don't know.
The great fear is not just whether we don't know if some of them are dead or alive. The great fear is that we actually might lose some of them because Gaza has gone through 15 months of war. And some of the murdered hostages, we can lose them forever. And this is a fear that is very much present within the families. So, of course, we want to see every living hostage coming back home alive. But we also want to make sure that the families of the murdered hostages can find some closure in the form of a proper burial.
How did they manage to confirm that your cousin had been murdered on October the 7th and that his dead body was taken away? How was that actually achieved?
So the IDF they have found some findings on the ground from the gear that belonged to Tal, and they had done some DNA analysis, and they realized that with what they found, there is no way he's still alive. I'll spare you the gruesome details, but you can make up for it.
How hard has this been for you then, since you knew that he was dead, and the desperation still to be able to give him a proper burial?
It took me a couple days to think about what am I doing from now on, until it was very evident for me that he's still a hostage. He still needs to be back and find his final resting place in the kibbutz where he lived his entire life, where his family is, that his kids would have a tombstone where they can go up to and say, this is dead, this is dad. He died a hero, but he's right here next to us. Because they still ask, how do they say that dad is dead if nobody had seen him? So how will these kids find any kind of solace, any kind of closure, and begin to rebuild their lives as orphans, unless they actually have this burial place?
And I understand his wife gave birth after October the 7th.
That's right. Ella was 2 months pregnant on October 7th. At first, she kept recording videos for Tal for when he comes back, so he would be a part of the pregnancy. And she gave birth a little over 6 months ago to a beautiful baby boy who will never know his father, but hopefully would have at least a tombstone to go up to and hear the stories about who his dad was, and not have this miserable ending of thinking, my dad is just a few kilometers from on the other side of the border, but he'll never be back home.
Udi Goren talking to me a little bit earlier about the importance of getting hostages back, dead or alive. Well, let's speak now to Adam Manit, whose cousin Taki Idan was taken hostage after Mr. Idan's 18-year-old daughter was killed by Hamas. What do you make then of the news that the 3 female hostages, it does appear, are beginning to be handed over by Hamas to the International Red Cross?
It's been 470 days, and we've been waiting for this moment a long time. It's been an emotional roller coaster for all of the hostage families. But because we share and our fates are intertwined, we are, of course, joyous at the prospect that the families of Emily, Doron, and Romi will be reunited, hopefully very soon. And hopefully they are okay and well, and they can be. We can have a small moment of celebration that their nightmare is over. But we will all be continually focusing on returning the rest of the hostages home and demanding that that happen as soon as possible.
Well, indeed, so the anxiety remains, does it not, for so many?
Well, this is a part of the whole nature of this deal, is that there's an element of psychological torture for the families, because we don't get the news of who's being released when until 24 hours beforehand. It's staggered in such a way that it's going to take 6 weeks just for phase one, and then there's all of those hostages who didn't even make the cut for phase one, and there's so much more uncertainty in phase two. So there's still a lot of the devil is very much still in the details, and the devil right now is still taunting so many of us. We still don't even know of the hostages who's alive and who's dead. So it's a very anxious, fraught time for all of us. All of the families are experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion, and it is going to be a very, very long few weeks for many of us still.
So many people have come here to Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. It has provided a focus of comfort for many families and for people in Israel who have collectively felt the pain of these months and months of delay of release. Do you think this will help people believe that peace is possible again for this region after, 471 days of conflict and of death?
I think it's really difficult to talk about peace at a moment like this. There's still so much uncertainty, and we still don't have our loved ones returned to us. I think for Israeli society, we really need to focus on returning all the hostages so that we can begin a process of healing. As a society, Israel is very much in a state of trauma, and part of the healing process for that trauma will be returning all the remaining hostages. Part of the identity that we have as Israelis is that we don't leave anyone behind. Just yesterday we had the wonderful news that the body of Doron Shaul was returned to his family, and that hostage was taken by Hamas 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. And we were demanding his return as part of the demands, not just for those that were taken on October 7th. That's why we always talked about all of the hostages, and we will continue to do so.
Yes, he was just 30 years old, was he not, Doron Shaul, whose body, as you say, was retrieved today. The total number of hostages now in Gaza, 97, 94 of whom were taken on October the 7th. And Adam, remind us, I know you've told us before this week, remind us about Taki, remind us of what happened to his eldest daughter and the trauma that your family suffered on October the 7th.
My family experienced the full spectrum of trauma from that day. First with the invasion of their home in Nahal Oz, a community very close to the Gaza border. After the rocket sirens, the terrorists gained entry to the community and took a 17-year-old boy house to house, door to door, forcing him to speak Hebrew to lure out the families that were still in hiding. My family heard his voice. They knew that he was being coerced. They refused to come out. Tzachi, my cousin, was barricading the door. These are rocket shelters. They're not designed for intrusion, so there was no locks. It wasn't well reinforced, so he bodily reinforced the door to protect his family. And Mayan, who had just celebrated her 18th birthday only a few days before, the balloons from her birthday party were even still up in the house, perhaps feeling a sense of responsibility as a newly young adult, decided to go and help her father as well to barricade the door. And that's when the terrorists got frustrated. They shot through the door, they shot Mayan in the head, and Tzachi had to see his firstborn daughter die in his arms. As he was desperately trying to resuscitate her, the terrorists gained entry. They took the rest of the family, his two other children, out into the sitting room along with his wife. They forced Gali, Mayan's mother, to unlock her phone so that they can live stream the family's horror onto her Facebook page, and that's how a lot of my family, unfortunately, found out what was happening, and in fact the world, because the clips from that video went viral around the internet and were some of the earliest clips that come out of the massacre on that day. The family have lost their homes. They've had to bury Mayan without Tzachi home. We still don't know if Tzachi's alive or dead. We've had no proof of life. He's never been visited by the Red Cross. He left Frog March to Gaza by terrorists with the blood of his firstborn still all over him, perhaps not even knowing if they made it alive. He might not himself know if the rest of his family are alive. And that's also part of the torture and the anguish that we are all facing right now.
I know so many of you have expressed so eloquently how torturous it has been for you, and we appreciate, Adam, once again, you sharing that story with us, and we hope that Taki comes home safely. Thank you very much indeed. But while Adam was talking, we were watching pictures there of the West Bank Offa prison, which is where the handover of Palestinian prisoners as part of this deal will happen from. 90 of them, 90 to 95 names have been released, mostly women and children. We know that children are being held in Israeli jails. I spoke to one father myself whose son was taken at the age of 16 last September for posting on Facebook. And Palestinian families are tonight also waiting for their loved ones to return home, and what happens at Offa prison is the start of that process for them too. But here in Hostages Square, I'm joined by another family who was devastated by October the 7th, Gili Roman, whose brother was kidnapped from Kibbutz Be'eri. Thank you for joining us. So many people have come down here today to watch this process unfold. 3 young women being freed after 15 months in captivity. How does that make you feel?
I think that what you're witnessing is the glory of the Israeli people. We fought for our people for 15 months. We are really feeling like one big family, and we are paying also big prices today. We are releasing heinous terrorists from jails in order to get our loved ones back. I know the feeling of getting your loved one back. My sister came back after only 54 days in Gaza. And on the other hand, her sister-in-law, also our family member, Carmel Gat, was murdered in Gaza in late August. So we know what a deal can bring, and we know what a delay of a deal can yield. It's life and death, day and night. I think that you can see our excitement and our commitment to our people.
Yes, I spoke to Carmel's cousin, Gil, who you know so well, earlier today. He spoke with such passion about how this could have been done earlier, that the deal on the table is similar to the one, almost identical to the one that was on the table in May. And lives could have been saved, including of Carmel Gat, as you say, your family directly impacted by that delay. Do you also wish this had happened earlier?
Of course, we fought for that. I've been to the US many times. I've been also to London, spoke at the Parliament, spoke at Capitol Hill. I spoke at the UN in the National Security Council. We try to make the world to show more strength, to show more resilience that will help us bring Hamas to this point, and also push our own government. I think that we need to take responsibility, a global responsibility of the Western world for the life of our people and for the fight against terrorism, and this is part of it. And I think that, and I think we expected it to happen earlier.
Just trying to pull some chairs out of the way. It's getting quite crowded, isn't it? Apologies, Gilly.
It's okay.
And for your sister, who was freed after 54 days, she went through this process.
Yes.
How did she recount to you when she was told that she would be freed, and how this process of handover, what was going through her mind at the time?
Yeah, so, you know, first of all, they collect them. And this is by itself like a very unusual process, because they meet people sometimes they haven't seen through their captivity. My sister was held alone for 54 days. Yes. So this encounter is already very emotional. And then going to the Red Cross, it's very anxious. Like, it's a very anxious Hamas want you to smile. They want you to dress nicely. She was forced to wear a hijab for all the time in captivity, and all of a sudden they want her to have civil clothes and smile to the cameras. It's very nerve-wracking, and I think until the point that you are really in Israeli hands, when you see our soldiers, it's hard to believe, and it's hard to feel safe. And you're then told us and also other people, like the first time she went to the bathroom and understood that nobody is waiting outside to make sure that she is not running away, that she can just free. And I think it's hard to grasp that you can eat what you want, you are safe, you know where you are, speaking for the first time with your family members, the first time she spoke with her 3-year-old daughter who was waiting for her at home. Those are very extreme moments, and I know what the families are what they're going through right now and what they're going to experience. It's like the most extreme and pure sense of acceleration, and I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for them and for all our hostages, because we have one big deal that is supposedly divided into 2 stages. No, there's one stage. We need to see all of them back.
I'm just seeing the signs with a yellow heart and Romi, Emily, Doron aloft there. People have got those ready very quickly because the names were released so late. You talk so emotionally about your sister coming back. Do you remember your first hug, your first embrace with her?
Yes, it's very moving. We first saw her hugging her daughter. It was, we told Geff, and we found her because she knew we are looking for her. She knew that we are fighting for her. And yeah, then I held her, and it was very, very moving. And we jumped, all of us together. Yeah, it's I said many times I never gave birth, and I will not. But I feel that it's have something of that sense, but more with an added value that you are getting back a person that you already know. And so you're getting life, but life that you are already very dear to your heart, that you know really well. Like the main sense of a family is the sense of hopelessness, that there is nothing to grab. Like you cannot hold your person, you don't know where they are, you don't know how to save them. And once everything is stable, like you can hold her, you can see her, you can hear her. Really, and I think that all of our politicians and global politicians have to fully commit to that, and not to sabotage this deal, and not to be apathetic, not to show apathy towards it. We saw how the commitment and strength of President Trump has moved us to this point, and we are expecting that to continue. Yes, strength also brings results.
Well, we are expecting to see President Trump a little bit later on. His inauguration, of course, is tomorrow. Are you thankful to him for the pressure he put on this process?
Absolutely. I think that he should get a lot of credit for that, and I hope he will gain much more credit after all the hostages will be back home. Let's remember also there are American hostages. Some of them are in this stage, and some of them are in the next stage, like Idan Alexander. And I think that President Trump can be very proud of what he has done. This deal has been on a standstill for a long time, and due to his pressure and his commitment, and also the fact that he showed Hamas that there will be consequences to the fact that there will not be a deal. We are here where we are today.
And one final thought, there is a lot of focus today about the privacy required for those who are being released, because nobody knows what condition they are in after so many days of living in Hamas tunnels. In terms of your sister and the process that was gone through, you know, to check how she was physically and mentally, you know, what help will they be getting?
Well, initially they will be checked and they will get to a hospital and they will be physically checked. And I think the most important thing that they will gain their safety back and their families back. And afterwards, it's a very long process. It will not happen in a day. I think that the main focus of this day is to make sure that they are physically stable and that they get what they need, that they have control. They can say what they want to eat, they can say who they want to meet, they can say which information that they want to be released from now on about their release, and they will gain their control back in their lives. And the process starts today, hopefully in the next few hours, and have to continue through all of their lives. And we need to be patient as families, as the public, and to give them the way to move forward. It's a very hard process, but it's a very positive process. It's a healing process. What can be more positive than that?
To be able to eat what you want. I remember you saying, yes, Gilly. We really appreciate your time there.
Thank you very much.
Gilly Roman, whose family member was released as well, kidnapped there. So obviously our focus has been on the pictures we have seen of ambulances in the Gaza Strip belonging to the Red Cross, who are beginning that process of extracting 3 female Israeli hostages who have been held now for more than 15 months. On the other side, we know that Palestinian prisoners have been centralized at Offa prison, mainly women and children, 90 to 95 of them. They are part of a wider group of 735 taken from the West Bank and East Jerusalem, 328 of whom, we have been told, were handed down life sentences, 1 or more life sentences. They are all due to be freed as part of the first phase of this hostage deal. Certainly, Palestinian Prisoner Society, who we spent time with yesterday as they received the list of 735, believe that conditions in Israeli jails have got tougher after October the 7th, in revenge, they told us, for October the 7th. Let's get more then from our correspondent, Alex Rossi, who is outside Offa jail in the West Bank. And you've seen movement there, Alex, and obviously when we start to see prisoners moving from there, we will know that the handover of Israeli hostages has also been completed.
Yeah, in terms of the mechanics of it, Anna, we're not sure whether it's going to be exactly synchronized, whether there's going to be a delay before the prisoners that are being released under this ceasefire deal come out. But let me just show you the scene here. We are in the occupied West Bank, quite close to Ramallah. Here you can see there's plenty of press, there's plenty of Palestinians who've come out to celebrate this moment. It's seen as a moment of victory. We'll just turn the camera up here. You can see people lining the hills, lighting fires to stay warm. It is very cold when the sun goes in. The temperature here is starting to drop. More people around here. And then we will just turn the camera to the left and show you what is happening at Offa jail. In the distance, you can see the lights, the reds and the blues of police vehicles. And just behind them, it's probably difficult to make out on the camera, there are a couple of white buses. They've just pulled up there in the last 10 or 15 minutes. And the expectation is that the prisoners will get on those buses and then be taken out along this road here and then taken to a place called Bira, which is in the Ramallah district, and then be released. But people here are celebrating this moment. They didn't think it would come. They didn't think the ceasefire would come. They didn't think they'd see the release of these people either. Now, in terms of the list of people, in this first phase of phase 1, 90 prisoners are being released. They are mainly women and children. 78 are going to be released from the occupied West Bank, and the others from East Jerusalem. 12, some men, but mainly women amongst that number as well. Not clear at this stage when all of this is going to happen. Some people here are expecting that it could be delays. It could go long into the night. Others are saying, well, actually, as soon as those hostages are handed over, as part of the deal, the prisoners should follow quite soon. We have been told by the Israelis that none of this would have happened before 4 o'clock. We've now, of course, passed that time here. It's, just going 5 o'clock here. So it should happen quite soon. We're not exactly sure on the exact movement, but that's kind of the atmosphere here. People very excited, ready to celebrate the release of these prisoners.
Alex Rossi joining us there from Offa Prison on the West Bank. Thank you very much indeed. It is just after 3 o'clock. I am Anna Botting, live in Tel Aviv. You're joining us from a very crowded Hostages Square, people gathering here to watch Israeli television, to watch pictures of the International Committee of the Red Cross ambulances going into Gaza to begin the handover of 3 female hostages who've been held since October the 7th. 2 of them taken from one kibbutz, the other one from the Nova Music Festival. So after 15 months of war and a very nearly 3-hour delay here this morning, a long-awaited ceasefire is now underway. The delay was because Israel says it had not received the names of 3 hostages to be handed over by Hamas. Hamas said it was committed to the ceasefire deal, but there was technical difficulties. So let's talk you through who is going to be released today. 33 in total in phase 1, we're told. The names of the 3 to be released today are Emily Damari, a British Israeli citizen who was taken from Kfar Aza. Her mother, Mandy, is here in Israel and has expressed her delight at soon being able to hug her daughter. Romi Gonen, the 24-year-old, was taken hostage from the Supernova Music Festival on October the 7th. She was in a private car trying to flee as the Hamas terrorists attacked. She was on the phone to her mother. She said, "Mum, I've been shot. Everybody in the car has been shot." And thirdly, Doron Steinbrecher, a 31-year-old veterinary nurse, was also taken from kibbutz Kfar Aza on October the 7th. She was hiding under her bed when the attack happened and was also on the phone and said, "They're in the house, they've got me." So let's just show you the very latest pictures then. Red Cross ambulances are currently in Gaza for those 3 hostages to be handed over. We understand Hamas will hand them over to the Red Cross. They will be then taken towards the border and into the hands of Israeli Defense Forces. We've seen helicopters landing already in preparation for that. The Israeli Defense Forces have set up 3 reception centres, one in the north, one outside central Gaza, and one too in the south of the country, where the hostages will be checked over. No one knows what condition they will be in after 471 days held by Hamas, suffering the bombardment by Israel on Gaza, moved no doubt multiple times, living in tunnels underground. We just spoke to one hostage who said that his sister was held on her own for 54 days. There will be a sense of isolation for many of them. Once they've been checked over physically, their mental trauma also assessed, which is a great concern, trauma from the day itself, what they saw that day, how they were taken into Gaza, and then how they were kept by Hamas gunmen, not knowing if they would live or die. They will then be taken by helicopter to a hospital in Israel. The recommendation from the authorities there is that they spend at least 4 days adjusting in hospital. They'll meet their family members. They'll be reunited. We spoke to Gilly just a short time ago, who had tears in his eyes as he remembered hugging his family member for the first time, the emotion of that moment for them. Pictures then from inside Gaza. It is a waiting process. We were told it may take some 2 hours for this handover to be completed. People obviously in Gaza are in their own way also celebrating the ceasefire today. We know at the crossing at Kerem Shalom, some 200 trucks have been standing by. I spoke a while ago to a UNICEF representative. They have trucks in that queue trying to come in. 20 of them are fuel as well, giving power to people in Gaza, allowing them to heat food, which is much needed. Crowds gathering on the streets in Gaza too as they witness this process. Crowds celebrating first thing this morning at 6:30 UK time before the ceasefire was delayed. Well, earlier I spoke to Lord Pollack, who's very close to the Damari's family. He told me how they're doing.
Oh, it's been a nightmare. The only problem with nightmares, you wake up after a nightmare. This has been an ongoing nightmare for so long. And Mandy has been so brave, so brave. She wasn't cut out to go and see presidents and prime ministers and all the people that she has done, and she's done it brilliantly. Getting Emily's name out there, because without that work, I don't think today would have come. Keeping Emily's name there. And you know, there's a really nice piece, because on Emily's left arm is written, "Mum is always right." And so I think there must be some sort of comfort that during this horrible, if difficult period, that Mandy must have known that Emily would look at her arm and "Mum is always right" was with her throughout this. And we're, of course, all looking forward to hopefully seeing her later today.
How would you say the last 470, I think that's one day out actually, I think it's 471 days, but how has it been for all of these families? Because the not knowing, it's just so terrible. Look, for the human condition, isn't it?
We're all parent, grandparent. You do everything and you do anything to try and get it. It's impossible. And today's bittersweet. I mean, there are 3 families who are going to be happy. Maybe not happy when they see the state of their loved ones. But there's 95 other families who are still hanging on and going through this nightmare, as we said.
Lord Pollack speaking me there. He spent a lot of time with the Damari family. Mum Mandy is here waiting to hug her daughter. Hamas has told the Reuters news agency the hostage handover is underway. There have been cheers in the crowds here in Hostages Square. So let me bring in Ambassador Sheikh, who's been head of diplomacy for the hostages family, the forum that has worked so hard. You're watching pictures as we are. How are you feeling this afternoon?
I apologize in advance if I burst into tears in the middle of our interview, but this is a very, very emotional moment. It's bittersweet, because sweet for obvious reasons, because we're going to see 3 young women who have been virtually part of our lives, of this whole nation's lives, for 15 months, and suddenly we will know that they, although we won't see them physically, obviously, for quite a while, but we'll know that their families have got them back, and that is really the only piece of good news that we've had for a very, very long time. Why bittersweet? Because down the road there are still many tears to be shed.
We're watching Israeli television here, aren't we? I think they're a little bit ahead of the pictures we're getting. Everybody has their phone aloft. What's everybody watching here?
I think these are the first informal and unofficial images of the Red Cross cars taking possession, if you please, of the 3 hostages. And you know, it's difficult to decipher who this is, but apparently it's Romi Gonen that people saw.
So Romi Gonen is in a car right now. The pictures being shown on Israeli television, cheers and applaud from the crowd. This is, as you say, bittersweet. There is celebration today, but we're surrounded by faces of others who are still held.
Yes.
For you personally, head of diplomacy for the Hostages Forum family, how much have you fought to get this release? How hard have you had to work to see this day?
Not hard enough, because they're still not here. But in order to get to number 98, which is the number of hostages, you have to start with number 1. And this is why this moment is so important. And that these 3 young women who will come back to their families will be really just the beginning, the first crack in this terrible wall. It's been an emotional roller coaster, especially for the families. You know, we, the volunteers who work there, it's nothing compared to what the families go through. And they so much deserve. They saw Emily Damari.
Emily Damari.
Apparently.
What is happening? Are they in a Hamas vehicle still? So they're still in a Hamas vehicle, leaving where they were being held.
They're supposed to be handed over now to the Red Cross, who will then bring them to a meeting point with the Israeli authorities.
So we see masked Hamas militants, by the look of it, surrounded by armed men, taken into a vehicle. So this is stage 1 of the process to get them away from the places that they've been held.
Yes, and I hope that this is just a model, because there are many such stations on the way in the next 42 days until we reach the full number of 33 hostages to be freed in this part of the agreement. And then, you know, I can't repeat this enough. It's really a responsibility of the international community to be watchful that this agreement, that this deal will go through until the very end, until the very last hostage is back.
More applause. Perhaps we saw Doron Steinbrecher as well, moving into the car. I know that some hostages were freed in November 2023. We know how traumatic this process was for many of them. Some suggested they thought they were going to be taken to be executed. They don't necessarily get told what is happening.
They don't necessarily. I hope this is not the case here. But, you know, in any event, this is a different situation. I mean, the 110 people freed last November, November 2023, they were freed after 50 or 52 or 53 or 55 days of captivity. Now we're talking about people who went through nearly 10 times as much. So we don't know what the physical or psychological situation of these young women will be.
An Israeli official has now said that the 3 Israeli hostages have been handed over to the Red Cross. Your reaction?
Amazing news. Amazing. Yeah, many people will, but, you know, these are the good tears now. There were so many bad tears, and there still are. You know, there are people who are waiting and who will unfortunately get bad news out of these exchanges, because we don't know that everybody is in good health and everybody is alive, except the 36 people that we know that are confirmed dead. There might be bad surprises, but also good surprises. But let's start with today. Today is really a day of joy.
But you're right, this is the first confirmation we've had that those 3 hostages are alive.
Right. I hope they're in reasonable shape. They can't be in good shape after such a long time in horrendous conditions. But I hope they can start a very, very, very long journey uphill to rehabilitation.
Crowds gathering, obviously, in Gaza. We see the masked Hamas fighters as well, their guns aloft. A thumbs up from one of them I've just seen as well, actually, because this is part of a ceasefire that the people of Gaza have wanted, have they not? And we know that people have been taken from Gaza into Israeli prisons. Possibly they believe they'll see the return of them. They've not been named, we know. So this is the beginning of a process, a two-way process.
I'm listening to you. I'm sorry, I can't listen to both.
No, exactly.
But there's something good happened.
Something good happened, yes. Another big cheer from the crowds here. I've been here a number of times. This is the first time. There's a sense of joy in this place.
That's so precisely seen. It's, you know, everybody deserves a moment of an uplifting moment, and it is. It comes in terrible circumstances, and I have a thought for the people in Gaza too. The thing is that, you know, this agreement in the end is tragically simple. You can't end the war without freeing all the hostages, and you can't free all the hostages without ending the war. It's as simple as that. So the last hostage who will leave Gaza will also bring the last moment of concern and worry for the citizens of Gaza and the beginning of rebuilding.
Well, we're both watching pictures from Gaza, surrounded by people cheering in Tel Aviv and Hostages Square, a moment that so many people have longed so hard for here.
Yes.
Does it begin a sense of healing for people about the trauma and the tragedy of October the 7th?
I both hope that the answer is yes, and I hope the answer is no, because there's still a very long way to go, and a lot of things can go wrong on the way. And it's wonderful to see these three women freed, but you can't just look away now and go to other business. This is still the focus of Israeli society, of the Israeli government, and should be the focus of the international community. It's not over until it's over, and it will be over when 98 hostages, alive or dead, will come home.
Here in Hostages Square, people have their telephones aloft taking pictures. There in Gaza, people have their phones aloft taking pictures too of the freedom of 3 Israeli hostages, the beginning of the end, possibly here, stages to go certainly, but at least phase 1 is underway. People like you have worked so hard to achieve, have you not? Personally, do you feel that you have had a part to play in this, or have so many people?
A tiny part, but I feel grateful to the families that they gave me and some of my colleagues an opportunity to do something useful. That's all. And I must say a word about the diplomatic community here in Israel. Many ambassadors have gathered here, and many of them have been very close to the forum and very close to there are 20 citizenships among the hostages, nearly 20, including a few British citizens, British nationals, but there are French and Argentinians and Serbians and Germans and Austrians and all, many. And we have felt their solidarity all along. And, today there is a British citizen who is being freed, Emily Damari.
Well, the Red Cross has now communicated that the 3 Israeli hostages were transferred to them. We saw chaotic scenes amidst crowds, Hamas militants. They've been transferred to the Red Cross. They are now on their way towards the Israeli Defense Forces in the Gaza Strip. We're watching pictures now of the southern border area. This is where we are anticipating they come out. We know that the IDF set up 3 reception centres, one in the north, one around Reim in central Gaza or opposite central Gaza, and one in the south, not far from the Kerem Shalom crossing. It is in the south we are anticipating that they come out. So what would you anticipate to see here?
Well, I'm not sure we're going to see all of this, but they're going to be handed over from the Red Cross to the Israeli authorities, and they will undergo a first checkup by medical staff, and then transferred to hospitals that have been preparing for many, many, many months for this moment. And, according to their both physical and psychological well-being, they will be handled and treated as seen best, and hopefully very quickly be reunited with their families.
Amid the stated aims of the war for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was the release of the hostages and the destruction of Hamas. As part of the handover, we see Hamas fighters in their vehicles, their guns aloft. It does not feel, looking at these pictures, that Hamas has been destroyed.
Can I be honest?
Yeah.
I couldn't care less. I'm here, really, we're a civil society organization. Our only concern is the families of the hostages and their release. And, if the other side celebrates fine. I don't think it's a good thing that Hamas will come out of it victorious in Gaza. I don't think it's good for the Gazans. But, you know, this is my remit, and I'm happy for whoever feels liberated today.
I asked because it felt at times the two were not compatible. Indeed. Yes. There's the border picture once again. It looks like vehicles are approaching. Who knows if they are indeed those ambulances of the International Red Cross who will make their way across the border. Israeli television has turned up the volume here.
It's a song that became sort of an anthem of it's called Home, the song, and it's become sort of an anthem of the Hostage Square.
So an anthem of Hostage Square is playing. They're showing on the television here the faces of 3 women in a Hamas vehicle before they're handed over to the Red Cross. Let's take you then to Offa Prison, the other part of this exchange. Alex Rossi is standing by for us there. Alex.
Hey, Anna. Well, we are starting to get some signs of activity here at Offa Prison, which is behind me. You can just see it in the distance. You can see the red and blue lights of police vehicles. We've seen military vehicles coming down this road here from the prison. We are expecting the prisoners to be taken down on coaches down this road and then dropped off somewhere towards Ramallah. Not sure exactly where. But there were a couple of coaches over there. We'll just move the camera in a bit further. Offa Prison, of course, is where the prisoners from other prisons are being brought. 90 in all today in this first phase of phase 1. And then this is being used as the distribution point from where they will leave. But we'll just move away from the prison now, and I'll show you the scene here. We're up on a hillside in the occupied West Bank overlooking the prison. Plenty of press here, much of it Palestinian, international press as well. But lots of people have come out as well to witness what's about to happen, but also celebrate as well. You can see the hillside here. People have been lighting fires to stay warm. Now, we've also heard in the last 10 minutes the sounds of fireworks, people letting off fireworks to celebrate this moment. In terms of the prison list, 90 people in this first phase, so that's 30 prisoners for each of the female hostages. 78 of them are women and children. They are from the occupied West Bank, that's where they will be released. And 12 of them are men and women from East Jerusalem. Interestingly, when you go through the list of people who've been taken by the Israelis, been arrested and obviously gone through military courts, most of them have been arrested since October the 7th. We know, of course, that Israel has intensified its operations, its raids here in the West Bank and also in East Jerusalem since October the 7th. But the mood here is one of celebration. People, you know, for many months didn't think they would see this moment, but people have come out to not only witness it, but also to celebrate the release of these prisoners.
Alex Rossi updating us there from Offa Prison. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Well, here in Hostages Square, they have shown the faces of 3 young women. It is the first proof of life that they are here. Alistair Bunkle, our Middle East correspondent, joins me now. It's been an extraordinary atmosphere, certainly, but we now know that those 3 hostages held for 471 days are now making their way back to their families.
Yeah, and the movement by road from where they were handed over in Gaza from Hamas to the International Red Cross should be quite quick, depending on which route they take. No more than half an hour. I mean, we saw at the moment of transfer and at the location of transfer, it was a very intense environment with hundreds of Gazans, many young Palestinian men crowding around the various vehicles. But I think once they've got through that, actually it should be very quick. We think they're going to the Reim meeting point, which is kind of the midpoint of Gaza. We've seen them, or they have been seen, walking. It is a sign that a lot of people dared to hope for, because we had no idea, the Israelis had no idea what condition they would be in. I understand that one of them might have had a bit of medical attention there before being made the transfer, but they will now go to the Israeli military, who are waiting for them. We've seen helicopters waiting, and their mothers have all been taken down to the border to meet them when they come out.
That is an indication we had a little earlier, actually, that Emily Damari was one of those. We had been told that she'd packed a bag with her favourite things in it. These are mothers who will want to hug their children.
Oh, I mean, you can't imagine the feelings when they finally see their daughters. They have been campaigning for almost 18 months for their release, to keep their story in the public's eye here in Israel. Not hard, the hostage crisis, which is ongoing, just tears at the psyche of Israel and will continue to do so until every last hostage is out. But harder to keep them in the public eye around the world, as life has moved on around the world. But they have travelled around the globe, making sure that the stories of these hostages are still being told, whether it's in forums like the United Nations or parliaments around the world, whether it's at rallies being held in London or Paris, you name it. And so Mary Damari, when she sees her daughter Emily, as the case for the other mothers, I'm sure it will be an intensely private and emotional moment. I very much doubt we will get to see it for very good reasons, but what must be going through their head now?
And in terms of Gaza, huge crowds came out for this moment as well. This is the start of a much-needed ceasefire for the people of Gaza. They woke to more bombing this morning with the failure of the ceasefire to be enacted on time, a near 3-hour delay. More bombing, we saw more deaths too. And what will it mean for the people of Gaza now, do you think, to wake up or sleep overnight without the sound of Israeli jets in the sky above them?
Well, in the way that I'm sure the hostages, when they get out, will barely be able to believe that they are into freedom, I'm sure people in Gaza will barely be able to comprehend that they can now go to sleep in a degree of safety. But of course, Gaza is almost totally destroyed in many parts. They will still be living in canvas tents in makeshift humanitarian zones. They'll be starting to make their way back home to parts of Gaza where they can. The transfer back to the north will be a slowish process, and they will find that their houses, their apartments, for the most part, have been completely destroyed, and life there will never be the same again. This Gaza is a place over the last 15.5 months where people have been dying in their dozens most days. Children, tens, thousands of children have lost their lives. There are stories like women giving birth without any kind of anaesthetic to have cesareans. Children dying as a result of the cold in this past winter. Starvation, malnutrition. It is a place that has undergone and gone through the most horrendous 15.5 months, but they will be hoping that finally aid can get in the volumes that is needed.
Well, the image on the television screen behind me in Hostages Square, as people applaud once again, is the faces of 3 young women in a Hamas vehicle about to be handed to the International Red Cross. The faces of Romi, Emily and Doron, now freed, making their way towards the border to be handed over to the Israeli military to eventually be brought into Israel to hospital. And as we heard there from Alistair, their mothers have flown down to greet them. Quite a moment that will be. But let's return and focus then on Gaza, a ceasefire so needed there. We know that some 200 trucks have been waiting at the Kerem Shalom border, waiting to bring aid in. So let's talk now to Ahmed Abu Razik, founder of the Gaza Great Minds Foundation. Welcome to you. What does today mean, do you think, for the people of Gaza?
Hello, Anna. Thank you for having me. Actually, today is a new chapter in the Palestinian history. Today was a tremendous day to us in Gaza Strip. We felt like we are real life again. We are newborn again. I can't tell you about the mixed feeling that we are feeling right now, a feeling of grieving and happiness in the same way after seeing the bodies today on the streets, the skeletons from where Israeli were on the war zones in the northern side of Gaza and even in different sites in Gaza. The scenes were horrific. We didn't even imagine this in our worst nightmares. All houses were wiped down and we felt like we are walking in a zombie land. Skeletons everywhere, dead bodies, blood is everywhere. So people in Gaza now, they can breathe, they can sleep without bombs at night, terrifying their children. They can at least eat a meal a day, not suffer every day with, with the lack of food and nutrition. Yeah, it's a new chapter in our life.
A zombie land, a hellscape, it's also been described as. Ahmed, just give us what it was like day to day for you living in Gaza City.
Today we woke up in the morning in a hope of finding one of our houses standing. So the families rushed to the northern side of Gaza, but we were shocked to see no house were standing. So we were happy, but we still alive and we will not see more dead or news about that. But we went to our houses, even knowing that they are destroyed, because we want to grab even a memory or even a doll for our children, even a small picture remind us with the beautiful days that we have left before this occupation come or this war come in Gaza. So it was, for me, it was a grieving day. Yes, mixed with some celebrations on the ground, because now we at least we will not hear sad news or massacres day and night. But, it's not easy to see your house, rubbles, just rocks. It's not easy at all.
So very difficult. And we heard from the outgoing US Secretary of State Antony Blinken last week, who suggested that every family in Gaza has lost someone. Dare I ask if your family has lost people in this war?
I lost my father. I lost my father on the 4th of November, and the first day of the so-called ceasefire, the previous ceasefire. He was killed by a sniper, shot him in his stomach, and he stayed one day in the hospital without a doctor to treat him. I lost my father. I lost most of my family members. I lost a lot of my relatives, a lot of my friends and my students also.
How are you living with that devastation to your family and the community around you?
Come again, please. I didn't hear that coming.
How are you dealing with that trauma of losing your father and losing part of that community around you?
I'm not gonna lie in you and telling you that we are coping or we pass this stage of our life, but we still suffering from trauma, and we can't pass this because simply we still live in war environment. Like, don't imagine that with the ceasefire, Gaza to return to heaven. So everywhere you go, you see blood and dead bodies and destruction everywhere. It's not easy at all. We need years in order to heal just from the trauma and from the psychological issues that we already had. It's not easy at all, and the pressure on us because I'm now responsible of my family, all of them, after my late father passed away. So it's not easy at all, and we hope in the coming days hold better news or rebuilding for Gaza, more aid's coming so we can rebuild again and relife again and see beautiful days and beautiful memories in front of us.
I know that the United Nations, on the anniversary of October the 7th, estimated that there were 42 million tons of rubble in Gaza now. It would take 14, perhaps 15 years of reconstruction to rebuild, to start again, to start afresh, given so many homes. I think more than 90% of homes have been destroyed there. It feels exhausting to even hear about the process that needs to be got through to rebuild Gaza. How are you hoping to live now, day by day? Will people start to try to go home to see where they live? Will people be back on the move, do you think?
I'm talking about myself, not just talking about people. I will live in a tent. I already live in a renting apartment, but the owner of the home, his house was totally destroyed, so he will be in this apartment, the renting apartment where I am. But the thing is that me and many Gazans will live in tents. We will get back to the Stone Age, if you can say so, and living in these tents, which is really, really cold at winter and really hot at summer. You can, like, we previously lived in a tent, and I can't just imagine or describe in words how does it look like to live in a tent with your children. I have a child. He's just 2 months old. He came in war, and I can't describe it, but believe me, it's not easy at all to live in a tent or in a camp. And most Gazans are now actually living in classes at schools, taking it as a shelter, because there's no shelters in Gaza. There's no caravans which are ready or for human being use. Like, they are just tents for camping, like you guys having for camping for a day or not, or a day or two, but we are living our life in these tents. It's 4x4 tent. You need to cope, you need to live, you need to sleep, you need to dream, you need to rebuild your future from this point, from that tent. So it's not going to be easy days coming, but hopefully the good thing is there's no killing, there's no massacres day and night.
And Ahmed, do you have confidence in aid agencies, charities, the international community, UNRWA, even the UN Relief and Works Agency, to help deliver, proper accommodation for people possibly, or the food, sanitation, water systems that are required? Do you believe that help will come?
I hope so, Anna, but as a Palestinian living over 15 months from this genocidal war, I can tell you that the humanitarian organization or others, they didn't even care about Gaza. They just following Israelis, orders. And from what I saw, that the word let us down. Maybe some people on the ground, they refused the occupation. They tried a lot, but talking about the big organization, for the global organizations, they did not do what was expected from them. I hope this chapter change, or this period, something else happen. But I'm sorry, we lost hope. We lost the trust on the global community, or let me say, the global international organization, to be honest.
Mahmoud Abu-Rizik, founder of the Gaza Great Minds Foundation, you have expressed so clearly to us what life has been like for you in Gaza and continues to be. We really appreciate it. Well, here in Hostages Square, a big cheer has just gone out. We'll try and find out exactly what has happened. It could be that the 3 young hostages have reached the border. We'll find out, certainly. We know that they have been handed over by Hamas in a vehicle. and taken by the International Red Cross towards the border. The cheer was so big. Let me find out. Excuse me, what has just happened?
They are in Israeli hands.
They're in Israeli hands. So confirmation here from Hostages Square of people listening to Israeli television. A huge cheer went out. It is understood that the three hostages, Romi, Emily, Doron, are now in Israeli hands, and the checkups that we've talked so much about, physically, mentally as well, will start to go underway in the reception centres that they've set up. They will also meet their mothers. We know that they have travelled down there to be with their daughters. The crowds here have stood watching the faces of those three women on the screen. I wonder if we show it quickly. And waited to hear the news and watched the handover, certainly, from Hamas, the chaotic scenes we saw there. Everyone will sing now, I think, probably in Hostages Square to pay tribute. More pictures of that moment to come, but in the meantime, a short while ago, I spoke to Daniel Lifshitz. He's waiting for his grandfather, Oded, to be freed. Let's see what he had to say.
I'm so happy that it's starting. We have Oron Shaul body being recovered today from Gaza, rescued, closure for more than a decade to the family, and now we see Romi, Doron, Emily going back to their beloved ones. They are my family as well. Each one of them coming back, it's one less stone from my heart and one less stone from my grandmother's heart, because I'm not feeling inside Gaza. I'm feeling in October 7, and I'm feeling that all this part, but my grandmother, she feel in a tunnel in Gaza until they all back. So 4 went down today, 3 hostages back. A continuation is very, very important, and I'm looking forward for all the 33 to come back home.
Yes, and then subsequently the others, of course, too, because, you know, the list goes way beyond that. Yeah. Tell us about your grandparents, because both were taken, weren't they, from kibbutz near Oz, and yet your grandmother was freed, if I remember, on day 17.
Yeah.
She was not so well, is that right? 2 of them were freed that day.
Yeah, so firstly, I was very, very shocked that my grandparents were kidnapped. On October 7, I saw some footage and some videos of old people getting kidnapped, but I couldn't believe it. I couldn't process it in my mind. And at 6 p.m. when they told me my grandparents being probably kidnapped because the house is burned but there are no traces of body, I was in shock. And then when my grandmother came back, that was unbelievable, because she lost almost 10 kilograms in 17 days, and she was in a very bad health situation, and she was released because eventually they were afraid that she will spread diseases in the tunnels. And Nurit was released, Nurit Cooper, because she broke her arm and it was all black and she was in a terrible situation. My grandfather, we don't know what's going to be with him, because
how old is he?
He's 84 years old. He's the only great-grandfather held hostage in the world. We see the clock saying 470. They were, all of those 33 being in that list, which so-called humanitarian list, with the right pressure from the international community, they would be released after 7 days, not after 471 days would start that. But we are here. We look forward. We wanted to be in this situation. As much as it's tough and hard, I welcome it with blessing, with love, because this is where we want to be. And my grandfather, the last thing we know about him was from November 23, when he was, at start my grandmother said he was murdered, because she saw him unconscious and bleeding. She thought he was dead, but then he was just unconscious. And 2 hostages saw him, one of them Ada Sagi, when she was kidnapped from Kibbutz Nir Oz. She was in shock that there were so many civilians in Kibbutz Nir Oz on that day, from the age of 10, 14. And she said that she went into a storage of fruits and vegetables inside Khan Yunis, and she saw my grandfather on the table. He was with a white galabia bleeding. He was conscious, and he told him that Ada, she knows Arabic, I know a bit, she knows more, speak with her. They told her that they are going to take the bullet out of his hand. And then another hostage, Hana Katzir, rest in peace, a hero that had been kidnapped from her wheelchair in Kibbutz Nir Oz. She said that she was with him for about 20 to 30 days. They were in an apartment. They didn't get any medication. And after 20, 30 days, he felt bad. And they took him maybe for treatment, we don't know. But Hannah stayed there and she was handicapped. She told her captives, I can't stay here alone. He saved me. He saved my life here every day. So they moved her to another place with other hostages. So we have no information regarding if my grandfather came back to that apartment. So actually, we don't know. And
Daniel Lifshitz talking to me a little bit earlier about his hopes for the release of his 84-year-old grandfather, Oded, his grandmother already released on day 17 of this conflict, or after October the 7th. We've just had a statement now from the Israeli military, from the Israel Defense Forces and the Israeli Security Agency, Shin Bet effectively. The 3 released hostages, the statement says, are currently being transferred to IDF and ISA forces in the Gaza Strip. The 3 released hostages are being accompanied by IDF special forces and ISA forces on their return to Israeli territory, where they will undergo an initial medical assessment. The commanders and soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces salute and embrace the released hostages as they make their way home to the state of Israel. The IDF spokesperson's unit asks everyone to respect the privacy of the released hostages and their families. Watching pictures then of the border, a small crowd gathering there. It is very difficult for many people to access that area still. So the transfer, which we were told might take a couple of hours, young people there who are holding placards with pictures of the hostages on, placards to greet them as they cross the border into Israel. We know that 2 of the hostages were taken from Kfar Aza and one of them, Romi, taken from the Nova Music Festival. It was described how she was on the phone to her mother at the time. She tried to flee when the Hamas militants began to attack. So many ran. Some hid, we know, in clumps of trees. And Romi was on the phone to her mother describing how she was in a private car and told her mother, I've been shot. Everyone in the car has been shot. And it was clearly at that moment that she was taken hostage. So here in Hostages Square, they've been witnessing the moment of that handover. We have seen quite clearly the faces of those 3 hostages in a Hamas vehicle. The Hamas militants with guns, masked, their faces masked, big crowds gathering in Gaza to watch this moment of the handover. For the people of Gaza, this marks an important part, clearly, of the ceasefire process, which came into force earlier this morning. It was due to start at 6:30 UK time, 8:30 here. It was nearly 3 hours later when finally it was agreed, but not before bombing happened in parts of northern and central Gaza. 8 people, we understand, were killed in that and 25 injured. We watched ambulances this morning bringing those injured to hospitals in Gaza. It felt like the bombardment would continue. And then finally, Hamas managed to work out its technical field problems that it blamed for the delay, handed the names of 3 women to the Israeli forces, who could then give the go-ahead for the ceasefire to come into force. A ceasefire that was negotiated midweek in Doha, in Qatar. We know that envoys for both outgoing President Joe Biden and incoming President Donald Trump were there in Qatar, along with mediators from Egypt and Qatar itself. We know that the head of Mossad, the head of Shin Bet forces were there too, and the leadership of Hamas. The ceasefire signed, but yet more than 200 people died since then in Gaza as the Israeli bombardment continued. So the handover, chaotic scenes then in Gaza as those 3 women were handed over. The still that's been taken from that, no doubt circulating now on social media. They look scared, I have to say. And as part of the ceasefire deal, the other side is the release of Palestinian prisoners, some 90 of them, we're told today, 78 of them women, I think our correspondent Alex Rossi was saying. We can see stationary vehicles, blue lights standing by there. And it will be at the point, presumably, or soon after, that the Israeli hostages are in Israeli hands, that they will begin to gather those Palestinian prisoners to be released back to the West Bank and East Jerusalem. More than 90 names were released, and then yesterday, all of the names of Phase 1 were freed, apart from those that have come from Gaza. So 735 had come from the West Bank and East Jerusalem, 1,067 from Gaza as part of the deal in Phase 1. Well, here in Israel, they're seen as murderers and terrorists. We know that families who lost loved ones in terror attacks here in Israel have been informed that the perpetrator of that crime has or is going to be freed, saying they're standing with the bereaved families in that. And yet for the Palestinian prisoners, the Palestinian Prisoner Society, who looks after the needs of family members, suggests that people have been taken out of revenge for October the 7th, that the condition in prisons have got worse after October the 7th in revenge for those attacks. The head of that organization telling me yesterday that prisoners are losing 40 kilograms in body weight. They are starving, they are beaten. The conditions are so bad, there are so many to a room. And also that they've set up secret prisons. They believe that some of the Palestinians who've been taken from there are held in secret prisons. He called it a disappearing policy and a policy of revenge. We don't know the number of people who've been taken from Gaza. We've seen many of them stripped, virtually naked, on the streets of Gaza, waiting to be taken away. And I asked, do they include medical staff? We know some of them have been taken from hospitals. And yes, indeed, I was told they do include medical staff, but we simply don't know how many. And of the 1,067 who are on the list to be freed as part of Phase 1, they have not been named. So families in Gaza do not know if their loved ones are returning. They do not know if they are alive, and they do not know how they are being held in Israel. So pictures of the West Bank then, outside Offa prison, where those Palestinians will be freed. And as far as we know, our correspondent Alistair Bunkle joins me now here in Hostages Square. As far as we know, we heard from the crowds here, those 3 Israeli women are now in the hands of the Israelis, we understand.
Yeah, they've made it to the border. They were transferred by the International Committee for the Red Cross, and they are now in the hands of the Israeli military. We believe that the mothers were taken down there to meet their 3 daughters at that handover point. So familiar faces for them when they come back onto Israeli soil for the first time in 470 days since they were kidnapped on that morning of October the 7th, 2023. They will undergo medical checks there. There are reception centres that have been set up in the last couple of days by the Israeli military at 3 points along the Israel-Gaza border. They've been taken, we understand, to Raim, which is actually close to the Nova Music Festival, around the midpoint of the Gaza-Israel border. When there, they will have the basics like fresh clothes to put on, toiletries, food, but of course, crucially, medical care. The immediate kind of sustenance they might need or want from coming out as they start to realize that their ordeal is over. But then they will be taken quite quickly by helicopter to a hospital not far from where we are now, a place called Ramat Gan, which is just north of central Tel Aviv. The helicopters will take them and their mothers, accompanied by the Israeli military, to the hospital. I've been there before. It's a big, sprawling medical complex, about half an hour's drive from here, and they will be looked after there in specially designed rooms and wards, away from everybody else, away from the public, with the appropriate medical and psychological attention that they need to help their slow introduction back into normal life.
Stand by, Alistair. Let's listen to Joe Biden in South Carolina.
Today we're seeing hostages being released. 3 Israeli women held against their will in the dark tunnels for 470 days. 4 more women will be released in 7 days. 3 additional hostages every 7 days thereafter, including at least 2 American citizens in this first phase. We pray for them and their families. They're going to be a long recovery ahead. By the 16th day of the deal, talks will begin in the second phase. This phase includes the release of Israeli soldiers and a permanent end of the war without Hamas in power or able to threaten Israel. Hundreds of trucks are entering Gaza as I speak. They're carrying assistance for civilians who suffered enormously from the war that Hamas started on October 7, 2023, nearly 15 months ago. Today alone, we anticipate several hundred trucks will enter the Gaza Strip as I'm speaking. And after so much pain, destruction, loss of life, today the guns in Gaza have gone silent. This was the deal that I outlined for the world back in May 31st. Many of you covered it at the time. It was endorsed overwhelmingly by folks around the world, including the UN Security Council, unanimously endorsed the deal, and developed in coordination with Egypt, Qatar, and Israel. I've worked in foreign policy for decades, and this is one of the toughest negotiations I've been part of because of the pressure Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States. Some said my policy of a firm support for Israel was relentlessly pursuing diplomacy, risked drawing America into a wider war in the region. I listened to those voices, many of whom I respected a great deal, but I concluded abandoning the course I was on would not have led us to the ceasefire we're seeing today. But instead, it would have risked a wider war in the region that so many feared. Now the region has been fundamentally transformed. Hamas's longtime leader, Sinwar, is dead. Hamas sponsors in the Middle East have been badly weakened by Israel, backed by the United States. Hezbollah, one of Hamas's biggest backers, was significantly weakened on the battlefield, and its leadership was destroyed. Even as we worked for diplomatic solutions in Lebanon, we provided ongoing assistance and supported Israel's military campaign against Hezbollah, including its efforts to take out the terror infrastructure along the border between Israel and Lebanon. Israel's campaign was extremely successful, so much so that by the end of November, the United States had brokered a ceasefire in Lebanon. Hezbollah did what it said it would never do. It cut its deal and abandoned Hamas. And today, in Lebanon, there's finally a new president and prime minister, both of whom support a sovereign Lebanon without Hezbollah running the show or playing any part in it. The Assad regime next door in Syria is gone, removing Iran's ready access to Lebanon. Iran is in the weakest position in decades after the U.S. military helped defend Israel from Iranian missiles and supported Israel's military response inside Iran. Just look across the region. In Lebanon, there's an opportunity for a future free from the grip of Hezbollah. In Syria, a future free from the tyranny of Assad. For the Palestinian people, a credible path to a state of their own. And for the region and the future normalization and integration of Israel with all its Arab neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, who I've spoken with. You know, we've had many difficult days since Hamas began this terrible war. We've encountered roadblocks and setbacks, but we haven't given up. And a special thanks to my team, particularly Brett McGurk, who many of you know, who spent weeks and months working nonstop to reach this deal. Many of those weeks and months out of the country. Today's ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages is a result of a principled and effective policy that we presided over for months. And we got here without a wider war in the Middle East than many predicted. And now it falls on the next administration to help implement this deal. I was pleased to have our team speak as one voice in the final days. It was both necessary and effective and unprecedented. But success is going to require persistence and continuing support for our friends in the region and the belief in diplomacy backed by deterrence. So as we reflect on the news from Gaza today, we also remember all the victims of this war. We're mindful that the pursuit of a lasting peace, while never easy or quick, must always be our calling. So thank you all for listening. May God bless you all. May God protect our troops. I'm looking forward to this deal being fully implemented. And I'm sorry I'm not going to take any questions now because I'm waiting. There's a whole congregation waiting for me. And I'm sure the remainder of the day I'll have an opportunity to speak with you. Thank you very much.
Anything about the condition of the hospital?
Have you watched Stranger Things?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've just...
Well, the outgoing...
And they appear to be in good health, but it's early to tell. They may be across the border out of the Gaza Strip into Israel now. I'm not certain. Thank you.
Sir, any concerns about Hamas regrouping?
Yes, apologies. I nearly interrupted the outgoing US president, didn't I? He did take a question in the end. And actually, I can confirm that the three women, the three released hostages, have crossed into Israeli territory with IDF and ISA forces. It was the cheer we heard a short time ago here in Hostages Square. The statement reads, a short while ago, accompanied by IDF and ISA forces, the released hostages crossed the border into Israeli territory. The released hostages are currently on their way to an initial reception point in southern Israel, where they will undergo an initial medical assessment. That a joint IDF and ISA announcement. Joe Biden declaring today the guns fell silent, suggesting that on day 16 of this ceasefire deal, negotiations will begin once again. That is to free Israeli soldiers still held in Gaza and to negotiate the end of this war. Let me bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, and also outlining how this region has changed so seismically as part of this campaign. Lebanon, Syria, even Iran, he said.
I remember in the hours after October the 7th happened, being briefed by the IDF, the Israeli military, and the message they kept on saying to us, you know, this is not like anything that's gone on before. Put away from your minds previous conflicts that have happened between Israel and Hamas. This time is different. You will not have seen anything like this. But we, and I use the collective we for those of us who work and live here as journalists, I don't think had any sense of what was to come. I don't honestly think that anybody in the Middle East could have foreseen the circumstances over the last year and a half. I mean, who would have imagined that Iran and Israel would directly attack one another after so many decades of engaging in shadow war? Who would have imagined that Syria's leader, Bashar al-Assad, would suddenly fall in lightning fashion? The dynamic has changed beyond all kind of imagination or prediction, and it is continuing to change. The ceasefire today, this prisoner and hostage exchange, is not the end. It is nowhere close to being the end. It is the next stage in this multi-front war. It is a moment for Israelis to celebrate the return of three hostages. It is a moment for the people of Gaza to celebrate the guns falling silent. But there are still 93 hostages still in Gaza. There are still a Gaza Strip totally devastated that needs to rebuild. There are still regimes around the region that are being reshaped in different ways. We don't know where it's going to lead us, but this is an important moment in it.
Yes, and on the eve of inauguration for Donald Trump, there will no doubt be the impact of the Trump effect as well. Just hearing from the Israeli Defense Forces spokesman, Daniel Hagari, that the 3 hostages are minutes away now from being reunited with their families.
They will be met by a very small reception committee. They don't want to overwhelm them with too many faces, too many new faces. In previous occasions when hostages have come out, the IDF have almost been instructed, don't talk to them unless they want to talk to you. Give them space. There will be a couple of designated people who will have direct contact with them. Of course, their 3 mothers who have been taken down to that point, most importantly. But there will be 1 or 2 who will be having a direct contact with them unless they choose. They will take the lead. As the freed hostages, the people receiving them will be guided somewhat by them, but they will also need to guide the hostages to make sure that they have the privacy they need. Something that Daniel Hagari, speaking to the Israeli nation a couple of minutes ago, requested. Please don't put images onto social media. Please respect their privacy. But we're now seeing, we think, pictures, well, we're seeing pictures of the Israeli-Gaza border, and we think we are starting to see the images of the 3 hostages and the vehicles they're in coming closer to that reception point.
It is just after 4 o'clock. You're watching our continuing coverage of the ceasefire, which was enacted this morning across Gaza. The 3 Israeli hostages have now been freed. They were handed over by Hamas amidst huge crowds in Gaza by masked Hamas militants, handed to the International Red Cross, taken towards the border, where we understand they are now in the hands of the Israeli military. We're told they are moments away from being met by their mothers who've flown down to see them. Romi Gonen, Emily Damari, a British Palestinian, her mum Mandy has gone down to meet her, we understand, with a suitcase full of her favourite things, and Doron Steinbrecher as well. Both the last 2 taken from Kfar Aza. 3 mums have sat and watched their children, the first pictures of them. They've watched the pictures of them getting into that Hamas vehicle. 3 mothers crowded together on one sofa, watching the first proof of life after 15 months, Alistair, of captivity.
Amazing pictures, and they're now on their way to see their 3 daughters in person as they get close to the Israel-Gaza border. I mean, this will give enormous hope to the people of Israel. It's going to be a long wait the next few days before the next hostage prisoner exchange happens. But for those who have still got relatives inside Gaza, it will give them hope that their loved ones will also come out alive. Daniel Hagari, who was speaking in a press conference only a few moments ago, said that there are a number of hostages still alive. He wouldn't put an exact number on it, he wouldn't speculate about that, but they do believe that many of the 33 hostages due to come out in this first phase are still alive. And the 3 young women who are coming out of Gaza today will give hope to many of the relatives that more will come out the same way in the coming week.
Obviously, also as part of this deal, Palestinian prisoners are being released too today, Alistair. Pictures there outside the main jail where they've congregated, Offa prison on the West Bank. 69 female prisoners, we're being told, 21 male, 2 17-year-olds as well, 1 female and 1 male. The youngest is a 15-year-old boy from East Jerusalem.
Yeah, so 30 Palestinian prisoners being released for every every Israeli hostage, so 90 in total being released today. A mixture of ages, many of them women and children. Many of them have only been in prison for a few months, but arrested without charge and been held there without access to lawyers and for an indeterminate amount of time. So they too are now on the way back to their homes.
Well, one Israeli TV channel reporting now that the 3 hostages will be reunited with their mothers at Reim base in a few minutes' time. Reim, as Alistair has pointed out to us, is very near the site of the Nova Music Festival, which saw such devastating losses. And that was where Romi Gonen herself was taken from, back on Israeli soil for the first time since that terrible moment. On the morning, I think it was just after 10 o'clock in the morning, the final time her mother heard her voice, on the morning of October the 7th, 2023. We can hear now from Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari speaking for the Israeli Defense Forces.
חברו לכוח צה"ל ושב"כ, הן בידינו והן בדרך הביתה.
Way home. They are on the way to the IDF reception center where they will receive initial medical treatment and meet their families. From there, they will be transferred to the hospital. Emily Damari was abducted from Kibbutz Kfar Aza and marked her 28th birthday in captivity. Doron Steinbrecher was abducted from Kfar Aza and also had her 31st birthday in captivity. Romi Gonen from Kfar Vradim was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival compound, and she had her 24th birthday in captivity. Emily, Doron, and Romi are finally on their way home. These are truly moving moments, alongside all the pain that they've endured during their long period in captivity. Now we must allow their families the privacy they need in order to reunite with their loved ones. We are aware of the great expectation amongst Israelis with respect to everything that has to do with the return and condition of the hostages, and yet we must all behave with great responsibility, because these are very difficult days, and every additional difficulty piled on the families of the hostages and the hostages themselves is an irresponsible act. Please rely only on reports of officials, and it's very important, do not spread rumors, with an emphasis on the social media platforms. Alongside the great excitement, our hearts now go out to all the other hostages who are still being held in Gaza under inhumane conditions, and we expect their return. The first stage of the deal is expected to go on for 42 days. Today, the first 3 hostages have returned, and from now on, every week, between 3 to 4 additional hostages will be released. This morning, Hamas did not meet up with its promise and did not give us the list as promised. And in line with that, we attacked military facilities and armed Hamas terrorists on vehicles, and the ceasefire came into effect at a later hour than scheduled. We will not allow any breach of the agreements. As we've made clear this morning, once it came into effect, the ceasefire at 11:15 a.m., our forces were placed on the defense lines agreed in advance. In addition, we have increased the IDF forces in the Judea and Samaria region, and we are firmly prepared both on the offensive and the defensive. The IDF works together with the Mossad and the Shin Bet and the government in order to realize all the targets and goals of the war, to completely eradicate the military and governmental capabilities of Hamas, bringing back the evacuees to their homes, in the most urgent mission to bring back the hostages home. Even as we're speaking, IDF activity continues in all sectors and arenas with one clear goal: the security and safety of Israeli citizens. Questions: when will the hostages meet their mothers? As we're speaking, they are on their way. They're safe and sound in our hands, and they are on the way to the reception center. They will reach there in a matter of several minutes, and there there. They will be met by medical teams and the military adjutancy. And the most important thing, that's where they will meet their mothers. And then after approximately 1 hour, they will be flown to the hospital where they will meet the rest of their family members. How many of the hostages with the list of 33 are still alive? There are many hostages who are alive. I'm not going to give any specific number. We have given the list over to Hamas, and we expect to receive the people that were agreed upon, and we will not allow any breaches of the agreement. We've made that clear this morning.
So that was Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari confirming that those 3 released hostages are safe and sound. Well, joining me now is the Israeli government spokesman, David Mencer. Extraordinary footage we've watched throughout this afternoon, the handover from Hamas, the chaotic scenes in Gaza, and now about to be, or perhaps you can confirm, have they been reunited with their families?
Well, I can certainly confirm from the government's point of view that they are back in Israel, out of Hamas's hands, and we have them in our healthcare system, and they'll be getting the best possible healthcare they can after 471 days in captivity.
Are you able to tell us from initial assessments how they are? We certainly saw a close-up photograph as they got into the Hamas vehicle. They looked anxious, they looked scared, I have to say.
Well, look, all of us here in Israel are between a mixture of tears and trepidation and elation, because, you know, these are our daughters, these are our young women, these are innocent people that have been taken, some of them in their pajamas, from where they lived on that kibbutz down south, and now finally they've been released. This is a day that all of us here were praying for, hoping for. It's been a heavy, heavy price, both in our soldiers, but also in releasing these convicted terrorists. But all of us here, we don't know their state yet, but we are so happy they are home. We're absolutely elated. You can probably feel that in the square right now.
We were watching. It's a very noisy environment. We're very grateful you joined us here. We heard the cheers, we heard the applause as the various stages of handover were completed. How difficult has it been to get to this point? It's been a grinding negotiation, led perhaps by the Qataris, the input of the Americans, we know, the Egyptians. But how hard has it been for the Israeli government to watch this process unfold?
Look, I can't begin to tell you how emotional this whole experience has been for all of us here in Israel. We're mixed between tears and elation, and we don't know what sort of state they're going to be in, because we've heard from the mouths of girls that have been released from Hamas captivity, the terrible things which they've gone through, the dungeons, the rapes, the inhumane treatment which they've received. So all of us here are delighted that they're home. Look, from the Israeli government's point of view, we have a humanitarian duty to save our people. Every Israeli life is, of course, supremely important to the government of Israel. Of course, every life is important, but this government had a responsibility, a humanitarian duty to bring these people home. And the fact that we've got these 3 girls home, it is the most wonderful feeling. All of us are close to tears constantly. So it's a really wonderful time, and no doubt they'll be coming close to their families right now. All of us are absolutely over the moon.
You sound like you are. I've spoken to so many people who are nearly in tears already today, I have to say. There is a sense of emotion, partly because everybody has waited so long for this. Some suggesting this is a deal that was very close to May. You could have saved the lives of people like Carmel Gat. I spoke to her relatives today, the 6 hostages who were shot dead by Hamas in tunnels as Israeli Defense Forces approached. You could have saved the lives of Israeli soldiers who've died in Gaza. Why was it not possible to agree this deal earlier and save those people?
Well, I can answer that in one word, and that word is Hamas, the terrorist organization. I was briefed by the Israeli negotiating team, and they told me very, very clearly that it was Hamas who've been dragging their feet, Hamas who did not want to close a deal, and Sinwar in particular did not want a deal. With Sinwar's elimination, with the taking out of most of the leadership of Hamas, but also with Iran having been pushed back, with the Hezbollah having been massively degraded, with Hamas's patron in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, having been deposed by his own people, and Iran, their air defenses exposed, their nuclear program disrupted, their ballistic missile production having been also massively disrupted. Hamas had nowhere to go. The cavalry were not coming. The Americans have made this absolutely clear. It has been Hamas that have been dragging their feet all this time. We wanted this deal, and we are only too grateful now it has happened. It is, it's not a deal which we're delighted about because we're releasing terrorists with blood on their hands.
Well, a young teenager is one of them, to be fair. I doubt if that person is and most of them are women. So perhaps not in this first phase.
Indeed. There's been a corresponding
and some
price.
Some of them have been picked up sitting in their cars waiting at a checkpoint. Has there been, as the Palestinian Prisoners Society told me yesterday in Bethlehem when I went there, has there been a policy of revenge against the Palestinian people in the West Bank and East Jerusalem because of October the 7th?
So frankly, that's an offensive assertion. This is a democratic government that lives by the rule of law. We have an independent judiciary. You might have heard that this is there's a big issue here in Israel. So frankly, that is an offensive comment. We have a police force, a legal system where we take law and order extremely seriously. So look, when Israel apprehends people on suspicion of terrorism or after having committed real crimes, then they go through due process. Okay, this is the only democracy in hundreds of miles in any direction. Okay, so that sort of assertion to us is absolutely not.
So are you suggesting that those people who've been taken from Gaza and held, no one seems to know, have they gone through due process as well?
Well, look, we've taken a lot of people, a lot of Hamas people, suspected Hamas people, as prisoner. But that's been very, very important because they've shared with us a lot of information. We've wanted to get information out of them to see when is the next terrorist attack, where our hostages are, give us the strength of Hamas. And so that's been very, very important. And also, let's not forget, Israel did not expect this war. Okay, we weren't ready to take on tens of thousands of Hamas prisoners. So each of them will go through due process. It's our duty as a democratic country and a duty we take very, very seriously.
So we're watching pictures of Offa jail right now where there will be that release as part of this prisoner exchange. You are confirming that those who have been taken from Gaza, we've seen some of them stripped naked, sat in the streets, have we not? You're confirming they will go through due process.
So if they've been stripped naked, it's because we worry that they have a suicide belt on them. Okay, we've got no interest, Gazans are not going anywhere, Israelis are not going anywhere. Ultimately, we will have to live together. But it's our duty to make sure, it's our duty to the Israeli people to make sure that terrorists are apprehended and arrested and there's due process.
Yes, we're just watching pictures now of the Israel-Gaza border. It is at the Reem crossing, I understand, that we're expecting to see perhaps some of the pictures as the women are handed over. And how important is it that they managed to meet their mothers who've flown down to see them so quickly?
Look, Israel has been waiting for this moment for many, many months now, 15 months now. I've been in touch with some of the hospitals, Beilinson and Sheba Hospital. Both of them have been doing everything they can to get the system ready to receive them and to give them every possible care. That's psychological care, medical care, and of course to facilitate their families as well.
Let's show you then the pictures of those mothers waiting at that reception point that the IDF has set up. There they are crowding around. Let's just watch that moment.
גורם שיאיים על מדינת ישראל. בכלל, עזה לא יהיה שום דבר שיאיים על מדינת ישראל, כי אם
Yes, I think it's looping, in fact, but what an amazing moment for them, because what you have to understand about all the families is they do not know if their loved one is alive, and this is the first proof of life in 15 months that they finally can see that their daughters are safe and sound, as Daniel Hagari put it.
So incredibly emotional scenes for Israelis, excuse me. There are incredibly emotional scenes because all of us here in Israel, this is an open wound in our society. Okay. Look, Israel's government, to its credit, have done everything in our power to bring these people home. You know, let's not lose sight for a moment that they were taken by jihadists, a jihadist terrorist organization that, to be honest, hate their own people, maybe even more than they hate Israelis. They've tried to maximize the number of deaths amongst their own people. They say it very, very clearly. But also, their ambition was to wipe this country off the face of the earth. 15 months on, at a very heavy price, we are stronger, we are more united, we are more settled, and we look forward to a brighter, more peaceful future in this neighborhood.
Tears shed, no doubt, seeing those pictures across Israel. 3 mothers who've been through hell, that they both describe, or they all describe, the torturous process that they've lived through for 471 days of waiting. And for those who have been freed, they're living with the trauma of that day, of being taken, of seeing people dying around them. They're living with the trauma of being dragged into Gaza, living, we know, in tunnels. I spoke to one who suggested that their grandmother walked 40 meters to the surface to be free. How will the state of Israel now care for those people? What help will be offered to them to adjust to the life they can now see, the future they can now see in front of them?
Look, this was the worst day of Jew killing since the Second World War, and we know that these people have been through the most unbearable trauma, but this country has both physically and metaphorically thrown their arms around not only the families but also the hostages as well. They've been through hell, but we are so happy that they are home now and they can begin the rehabilitation process. Don't forget, now with these 3 young ladies home, there remain 94 hostages still in Hamas captivity. You know, this war could end right now before we put our kids to bed if Hamas surrendered and let our hostages go. The war would be over in an instant.
Well, I see the face just behind you of Doron. Shaul, you talked about a 30-year-old taken in 2014. His body was recovered today. It brought the number from 98, I know, to 97. One more family who has closure today, which I know you're very proud of that moment. But in Gaza, 90%, 92% of homes have been destroyed. Half the hospitals are dysfunctional. People have been starving. There's been a sense that they've been cut off without the food, water, fuel, power supplies that they need. What help will Israel offer the people of Gaza to normalize relations between these neighbors? Because if you don't help, how will there ever be peace between your peoples?
Just a quick reminder that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. It was actually an experiment to see what would happen if this idea about creating a Palestinian homeland could be free of Israelis and they could have a go at creating their own homeland. Now that experiment has been a shocking failure because here we are in 2025. Hamas turned it into a one big terrorist base. All the money that went into Gaza, instead of building up hospitals, universities, schools and roads, unfortunately went down into the ground to build this massive terror tunnel network. From Israel's point of view, we have got in as much aid as we possibly could. 1,300,000 tons of aid. That's more than enough food for everyone in Gaza. Hamas have stolen much of the aid and requisitioned it, and after feeding themselves, sold it back to Gaza's population at vastly increased prices. The best future for Gaza is
What's happening here? Just the booze that we're seeing. It's a statement, is it, from someone?
Yeah, it's a statement from a government minister who's not particularly popular.
Right.
But look, this is an open society. You're seeing it here, warts and all. Okay, people can express their view.
I have one final question.
Sure.
The stated aims of the Netanyahu government were to destroy Hamas after the horrors of October the 7th. And they were to get these faces home, the people we see all around Hostages Square. In destroying Hamas, though, hostages died. You know Israeli hostages died. And you could not bring them home because you were still destroying Hamas. Were those two mutually excluding things? Did that drag on the pain for the families who were waiting for their loved ones to return?
Look, it was Hamas that took them hostage, Hamas that kept them hostage, and Hamas that kept fighting towards us. Okay, they could have been home, our hostages, on October the 8th. Okay, they could have not been taken. It was Hamas that have been dragging their feet. This notion, which has been carried in much of the international media, that if only Israel had made a deal. I mean, maybe you know something I don't, because the people in the room in the negotiations, like the Americans, they all say the same thing. Hamas were not interested in a deal until they were greatly degraded, until their leadership was eviscerated, until their missile and rocket arsenal had been taken away, until, more importantly, Iran had been massively put back in its box. Now they've got nowhere to go. The cavalry's not coming. That's why they've come to a deal. Look, our objectives in this war remain the same. They are to bring back our hostages, the 94 of them which are still there, and also to make sure that Hamas is not in control in Gaza, because a Gaza with Hamas in control is a Gaza which is an enemy of the Gazan people. Hamas is an enemy of the Gazan people. The sooner they're gone, the better.
One word then to describe today.
Elation, and because we're in Israel, I'll ask for a little bit more, and trepidation at the same time.
A long way to go. David Metzer, you've given us a lot of your time. We really appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. So confirmation then from the Israel Defense Forces that those 3 young hostages are now safely at that reception centre, which has been set up by the IDF to relieve them. David Metzer's forgotten his phone and his keys. Sorry, just take those. Yes, indeed so. So confirmation then that this staging of the handover has taken another step. Let's take you now, though, to the latest from Gaza. Surgeon Dr. Hassan Abu Sitta is based at Gaza's Al-Ahli Hospital. He's actually in London, but has worked, obviously, in Gaza. This is a ceasefire for Gaza, is it not? How do you think people there will be feeling? How are you feeling that finally a ceasefire has been brought in?
Most of the people that I know have spent this morning trying to search under the rubble of their homes for the bodies of their loved ones so that they can give them a decent burial. My colleagues in the health system have been trying to make their way back to what is left of Kamal Udwan, what is left of Al-Auda Hospital, what is left of the Indonesian hospital, to see how we can start rebuilding the health system. And those of us who have lost colleagues, over 950 health workers killed by Israel in this genocidal war, remember them, remember the bravery of the Palestinian health workers who defeated this genocidal erasure. We remember Dr. Ahmed Maqadme, a young surgeon executed at Shifa Hospital. I remember Dr. Midhat Saydam killed in his house. The young Dr. Hammam al-Louh killed in his house. All of my colleagues Dr. Adnan al-Burshi was tortured to death in Israeli prisons, according to Israeli newspapers and Israeli human rights organizations. Today is a day that we think of our dead, and we think of our people, and we plan for tomorrow. Because despite the attempt to erase the Palestinian people, despite the genocidal erasure, tomorrow is a Palestinian day. We will build the Palestinian health system. We will mend our wounds. There are 13,000 Palestinian wounded, mainly children and women who need immediate surgery. There are 33 hospitals that have been destroyed, 12 universities that have been destroyed. 22,000 Palestinian children have been orphaned. There are 4,500 Palestinian children with amputation. All of this work, this 15 months of genocidal erasure, now we need to help people in Gaza mend their wounds and fix their broken lives. And that's what the aim of the world is, to help the Palestinian people in Gaza overcome this genocide.
Dr. Hassan, it is intolerable that so many children have died, that have been orphaned, that have been maimed. But you may have heard the Israeli government spokesperson, who was just with me, David Menser, suggesting it was Hamas who started this conflict on October the 7th with their brutality. You are outside Gaza now. You know, what do people think about Hamas? Do they wish they had never broken through the border that awful day at 6:29 in the morning, fired 4,300 rockets into Israel as that onslaught started? Do they wish that had never happened?
We wish that 1948 never happened. We wish that Israel had not tried to wipe out the indigenous population of Palestine and turned our families into refugees. We wish that the Sabra al-Shatila and the Deir Yassin massacres have never happened. We wish that the killings of the first and the second intifadas and all of the wars in Gaza had never happened. This is a war against the Palestinian people that is 75 years old. And to randomly pick a point in which to say that this is when we will accept history, what lies at the heart of the narrative of the Israeli spokesman, whose boss is now wanted by the International Criminal Court. So he literally works for a wanted war criminal. What marks his discourse is the racial othering of Palestinians, is the fact that he finds 18,000 Palestinian dead children completely ungrievable. He does not find it in any way problematic that his army amputated the limbs of over 4,500 Palestinian children. That and what lies at the heart of the fact that your channel refers to Palestinians as prisoners, even the children arrested without trial, and the Israelis as hostages, is again racialized othering of Palestinians that has allowed the genocide to happen for 15 months. Our lives don't matter, neither to you or to him, because of the color of our skin. Our lives don't matter, neither to you nor to him, because we are Arab Muslims. The racialized othering of Palestinians allowed this genocide to take place.
Dr. Hassan, with so many people having been injured during 15 months of conflict, with hospitals, I think half of them almost out of action, what help do you need now to get treatment to people in Gaza who so desperately need it?
We need as many field hospitals to be brought in as possible. We need an open humanitarian corridor to allow the capacity of the health system to very quickly be upscaled and medical teams to be allowed in with the equipment and the consumables they need to set up and to start treating the wounded. There are 13,000 wounded who now need treatment. Gaza now has the world's largest population of child amputees. We need to create an industry for prosthetic manufacturing and prosthetic fitting, because every child with an amputation needs a new prosthetic every 6 months. Every child that's wounded will require between 8 and 12 surgeries by the time they've reached adult age. The world has never seen a calamity of the magnitude that is Gaza and the wounded in Gaza. And every effort needs to be made to end the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza, to end this genocidal erasure so that it does not continue after the bombs and the bullets have stopped, so that the diseases and the wounds are healed and the infectious diseases are stemmed. All of this needs to be done as soon as possible.
It's very, Dr. Hassan, excuse me, it's very noisy here. It's quite hard to hear you. I understand you put out a tweet on your X account showing photographs of truly exhausted doctors that you work with. What was your message to them?
Well, that photograph, the young doctor in the middle was Ahmed Maqadmi, a winner of the Royal College of Surgeons Award, a young surgeon. He was executed in Shifa Hospital. The doctor on the back, on the left, is Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh, the head of orthopedics at Shifa. He was taken, arrested, and then tortured to death. And his body remains held hostage by the Israelis. Next to him is Dr. Mohammed Abeid, who's been arrested, who's an MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières surgeon, who was arrested and disappeared from Al-Auda hospital a few months ago. All of these doctors in the picture have either been arrested or have been killed. Like the 950 Palestinian health workers who've been killed and the 450 health workers still in Israeli prisons. Israel still holds Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who was arrested on New Year's Eve for refusing to turn his back on his patients and staying in his hospital. All of this. Israel had made the dismantlement and the destruction of the Palestinian health system a central tenet of the military doctrine of this war in order to make Gaza uninhabitable. And one of the ways it did that was not just by attacking hospitals, but also wiping out a whole generation of Palestinian health workers. We need to rebuild the medical schools, rebuild the training programs, and rebuild the hospitals. But in the meantime, we need to increase the capacity of the health system by bringing in as many teams with field hospitals that can be set up in weeks so that the wounded do not die of their wounds. We need to be able to help people retrieve over 10 to 15,000 bodies under the rubble so that public health catastrophe is ended. We need to help people rebuild the water and sewage systems. We need housing for Gaza. The scale of what was done to the people of Gaza, the world has never seen before, and the world owes it. But what the world also owes the Palestinian people is justice. There are 2 war criminals with arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court. These arrest warrants have to be fulfilled. Palestinians who have suffered from this genocide deserve the justice that the world has promised them.
Dr. Hassan Abu Sitta, I hear your passion. Clearly, the Israelis would not agree with the words that you've used, but we really appreciate your time there joining us. Thank you very, very much indeed. Well, watching pictures there then from the Israel-Gaza border, yellow flags aloft, Israeli flags aloft too, awaiting, obviously, anything they can see of those hostages who have been freed. They include Emily Damari. It's getting very loud here. So let me bring in Matthew Patrick, MP for Wirral West. He's been in contact with the families as part of a twin hostage campaign. Your thoughts then this afternoon, Matthew?
Hey, it's an emotional day. There's been a lot of hope and fear in the days running up to Emily's release. And in this moment, there's a lot of relief that she has been reunited now, I believe, with her mother Mandy. But then I think you still, for those many other hostages, you still have a lot of fear because there's a lot of uncertainty. This is a fragile deal with many elements, and it's on everyone now to make sure this deal holds and those hostages are released, the aid gets in and we can make those important steps towards peace.
Tell us a bit more about the Twin a Hostage campaign then, Matthew.
So it was an important day that we did with the British and British-linked hostages in Parliament, and I had previously met with Emily Damari, Emily's mother. I'd met her in Israel, but I'd also met her in my office where she talked to me about Emily, about this young woman with an incredible passion for life and a lot of positivity and hope. And we sat in my office, and it was then that Mandy gave me a photo of Emily, which is still up in my office, and said that whilst she really hopes there's this day that we can get where we get Emily out, and some months on from that, we hope there's a day where we can. Her favourite food is the chocolate buttons that you can get in England, and she longs for that day. And when that day comes, I'll be buying those chocolate buttons. But that other day, you know, we had. Matt, we talked about Emily, but we talked about the other British-linked hostages, about Eli Sharabi, about Oded Lifshitz, about Avanatan Or, and I spoke with their families and I heard their testimony of the horror that they have now, for 471 days, I think, have been going through, and the bravery they have shown and the love they've shown, and that has been inspiring. And I hope that today is a step forward. But as I say, there are many stages to this deal, and nothing is done until all of the hostages are home.
Yes, and we've spoken to the families of Eli Sharabi and Oded Lifshitz this week and today, in fact, as well. You know, obviously, they've had such trauma in their families, the Sharabi family most certainly. But the weight goes on for so many of them.
It does, and we press all the time for their release. I know that the Foreign Secretary has been in the region recently. I know that he spoke with Mandy Damari just yesterday, but he was meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, with Ron Dermer, with others to press the case for the release of all of the hostages, for those British and British-linked hostages as well, because the wait has been far too long and the horrors are untold for those hostages and for their families and what they've been through. And we now need to, this fragile deal needs to hold. Everyone needs to come around and make sure that it's delivered on, so that we can get not just Emily, but now Avanatan, Oded and Ellie out and with their loved ones.
We've just had a statement, Matthew, from Mandy Damari. Clearly has been so desperate to be reunited with her daughter, Emily. The statement that she's just issued: after 471 days, Emily is finally home. I want to thank everyone who never stopped fighting for Emily throughout this horrendous ordeal, and who never stopped saying her name. In Israel, Britain, the United States and around the world, thank you for bringing Emily home. While Emily's nightmare in Gaza, she goes on, is over for too many other families, the impossible wait continues. Every lost hostage will be released, and humanitarian aid must be provided to the hostages who are still waiting to come home. We ask that the media please respect Emily's and our family's privacy during this time. And we all know, don't we, that there will be such a period of adjustment from the trauma that these hostages have suffered to the idea of a future safe in their own country.
It makes you really emotional hearing that, knowing what Mandy has gone through for so long in her courageous and incredible campaign to bring her daughter home. And I am so thrilled for Mandy and for Emily's family that today is Emily's turn, and we wish them all of the love and peace and privacy that they wish right now. And our focus has to be on making sure that all of the hostages, all of that have been held for far too long and have gone through absolute horror, can now be released and returned to their loved ones as well. I think that is when this will feel like a deal that is real for everybody.
And we've seen the photographs of all three mothers sat on a small sofa looking at pictures of their daughters being freed. How hard has it been for mothers like Mandy, for families who are thrust into the spotlight, having to spend their days campaigning to get their relatives released?
I think they've demonstrated a strength beyond strength. When you hear what Emily went through on that day, when her dog was shot in front of her eyes, when she was shot in the hand and took damage through shrapnel in the leg, and then was blindfolded and bundled into a car and taken to a tunnel by Hamas. You can't imagine the horror and the pain that that family have lived over in their head time after time. And Emily told me about Mandy told me about Emily, about the love that she had for everybody. And then you heard when some hostages were released, just what type of person Emily was, trying to keep morale up and even singing with other hostages. And today is a day that brings all of that horrible weight and anticipation to an end for Mandy and the family. And I'm so grateful that that has happened, and I'm so pleased for them.
It's been such a long road, hasn't it? The not knowing has been so torturous for so many people. Did Mandy believe that Emily was still alive all this time?
You just didn't know, and it was a horrible thing to fear. And when names get released, and you hope that that means good news, but I think the closer you've got to this day, the harder that's been for the family in some ways, because you get closer to the reality that you might be reunited, but you're left to confront the fear of what might be as well. And so Mandy and I have exchanged messages before, and you just don't know how Emily is. You don't know how any of the hostages are, and you just have to hope. And you have to make sure that each and every day you're doing whatever you can to make sure that they are released at the earliest possible day and moment. And today is one important step towards that for all of the hostage families.
And one final thought, Matthew, as you said, 3 other British connected families are still waiting for news. You mentioned their names earlier. You know, how much are you working with them, supporting them, and keeping them sane, really, while they wait to see what happens next?
They are doing incredible work, and there is a forum that I've been working with through Parliament and in London to try and provide them some support and advocate on their behalf publicly in the Houses of Commons, but also you make whatever representations you can in private as well. Sharon gave me the yellow ribbon is the sign for releasing the hostages, but Sharon gave me a little yellow cactus, which is something that her family have been doing for peace for some time. Their bravery and their love and their courage has been incredible and inspiring.
Matthew Patrick, who's been in contact with the families, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. So a cheer once again here in Hostages Square. It is the footage we're about to show you, the moment that the young women were handed over. Let's take a look. So, as you can see, the moment that Hamas militants in frenetic scenes moved those 3 young women from one vehicle to another, masked militants pushing them into a car. Romi Gonen, aged 24, taken from the Nova Music Festival. She had been shot as she was taken away. Emily Damari, British, her mother Mandy has thanked for all the support for the campaigning to make this day happen. Emily Damari, now 28 years old, taken from the kibbutzim of Kfar Aza, and Doron Steinbrecher as well, 31 years old, also taken from Kfar Aza, a veterinary nurse. She was in her flat when Hamas came in and said, "They've got me." The guns held aloft, Hamas handing over their prized possessions, the hostages they've had, that they've held since October the 7th. 94 taken that day that are still in custody, handed over, as you can see, to the International Red Cross. Cheering from the crowd around them. Young women who've been held, no doubt in tunnels, moved around, handed over there to the Red Cross. Extraordinary pictures, certainly, from Gaza, but let's bring in our correspondent, David Blevins. It is the eve of inauguration. We know both Joe Biden and his envoy, Donald Trump and his envoy, worked hard for this deal that we're now seeing in play today, David.
Yes, the president has been speaking in South Carolina, a place of special significance to him. It was where he won the primary, which ultimately propelled him to the White House. He is marking his final day as President of the United States, marking the culmination of what he has described as the most difficult negotiation of his entire political career, a career spanning some 50 years. He said they had got there without the wider war in the Middle East many people had predicted. He spoke about it falling to the next administration now to ensure this deal is implemented, and added that it would require perseverance, a belief in diplomacy backed by deterrence, a little bit of advice perhaps for the incoming President Donald Trump. He did remind us in a short on-schedule statement that it was his administration which proposed this deal back in May, but again spoke of the unprecedented cooperation between the outgoing administration and the incoming administration. His Middle East advisor, Brett McGurk, having been joined in recent weeks by Donald Trump's Middle East advisor, Steve Witkoff. In fact, they divvied up meetings between them to ensure America was speaking as one, to quote the president. And by speaking as one, they have maximised the effect of this transition period to the point where they have achieved the seemingly impossible, where hostages are coming home.
David Blevins, with that reaction then from Washington, thank you very much indeed. So the latest pictures we've had, it is the moment that masked Hamas militants handed over 3 frightened-looking women to the International Red Cross, the start of their path to their new future, out of the tunnels in Gaza. They've been held for 471 days. To cheers of the crowds in Gaza, the Hamas militants pushed them towards the Red Cross and then climbed upon the vehicles, their guns toting, as you can see. 3 women who were taken on October the 7th, one from the Nova Music Festival, 2 from one of the kibbutz hit so hard, Kfar Aza. It took days to wrestle that kibbutz from Hamas militants. They're driven away in that Red Cross vehicle towards the border, towards central Gaza, Reim, which is near where the Nova Music Festival took place. And there, waiting for them, were their mothers, including Mandy Damari, who has fought so hard for her British daughter, Emily, to be free. They watched that moment on their phones, sat on a sofa with an officer of the Israeli Defense Forces, watching the proof that their daughters were alive and that they were about to be free, handed over to them. Those 3 young women now on Israeli territory, they will be assessed and they'll be flown then to a hospital. Here in Hostages Square, there have been cheers, there has been delight, there has been, for the first time in so long, joy at the release of the first of 3 hostages, 33 to be freed in total in phase 1 of this ceasefire deal.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
It is 5 o'clock in the UK, 7 o'clock here. I'm Anna Botting, live in Tel Aviv. After 15 months of war and a nearly 3-hour-long wait this morning, a long-awaited ceasefire is now underway in Gaza. It came into effect at 11:15 local time after Israel received the names of 3 female hostages to be freed today. Those 3, British-Israeli dual citizen Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher and Romi Gonen are now back in Israel. Well, this footage shows Hamas handing over the hostages to the Red Cross in Gaza City earlier this afternoon. Well, they were reunited with their mothers at the border, the three women waiting at that reception point as they were handed over to the Red Cross by Hamas here, receiving news of their daughter's release, seeing for the first time proof of life. Romi's mother, Meirav, Emily's mother, Mandy, and Doron's mother, Simona, joined together, sat together, watching that news, watching their daughter's freedom. Well, the three women will receive medical attention at this medical centre near Tel Aviv, where they will be checked over by staff. Much speculation about the condition they will emerge in after 15 months of captivity. The release of the hostages by Hamas is expected to be followed by the release of 90 Palestinian prisoners as part of the first stage of the ceasefire deal agreed in Qatar. Reports say the first release includes 69 women being held in Israeli prisons. Well, the British-Israeli woman Emily Damari was one of those released. The 28-year-old spent 15 months in captivity after being taken from her apartment in Kfar Aza kibbutz in Israel, 2 miles from the Gaza border. In the past few minutes, her mother Mandy released this statement. After 471 days, Emily is finally home. I want to thank everyone who never stopped fighting for Emily throughout this horrendous ordeal and who never stopped saying her name. In Israel, Britain, the United States, and around the world, thank you for bringing Emily home. While Emily's nightmare in Gaza is over, for too many other families, the impossible wait continues. Every last hostage must be released, and humanitarian aid must be provided to the hostages who are still waiting to come home. Well, in the last hour or so, too, we've heard from the Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari.
The first stage of the deal is expected to go on for 42 days. Today, the first 3 hostages have returned. And from now on, every week, between 3 to 4 additional hostages will be released. This morning, Hamas did not meet up with its promise and did not give us the list as promised. And in line with that, we attacked military facilities and armed Hamas terrorists on vehicles. And the ceasefire came into effect at a later hour than scheduled. We will not allow any breach of the agreements, as we've made clear this morning.
Well, as part of the ceasefire deal, Palestinian prisoners are being released. That's from Offa prison. Let's go to our correspondent, Alex Rossi, with details, Alex, of who is likely to be freed.
Well, we've had the list now of the prisoners that are going to be released. We understand 90 people are going to be released, women, children, and some men amongst them. 78 of those prisoners are going to be released back into the occupied West Bank. The others are from East Jerusalem. But let me just show you the scene here. The prison behind me, you can see Offa prison. But let's just turn and show you the people that have turned out to witness this moment. They've come here also as well to celebrate this moment. It's cold here since the sun has dropped. People have been lighting fires, but people have been waiting here, standing since kind of mid-afternoon. We understood that the prisoners would not be released before 4 o'clock local time. We're 2 hours ahead of the UK. But let's just show you the scene of what is happening at Offa prison. Offa prison, of course, is one of the reception and distribution points. There are 2 prisons involved in this mechanism. There's another prison close to Ashkelon in southern Israel where prisoners who end up going back to Gaza will go from. But today it is just Offa prison. You can see the red and blue lights of police vehicles, and then this road leading down from the main prison where the main lights are in the background. That's where the main prison is. We've seen coaches there that arrived some hours ago. The Red Cross, we understand, has also arrived as well, and we think the prisoners are being processed at the moment. It is unclear, Anna, at this moment in time, when exactly all of this will take place. It could go on for some hours. It might be much sooner. certainly as far as the Israeli authorities are concerned, they do not want to see celebrations here. Pure joy is what they said they didn't want to see with the release of the prisoners. It is, of course, an extremely divisive and controversial issue in Israel. There are, of course, many people who believe the release of the hostages should have been prioritised. It should have happened many months ago, but there are equally people who don't think this should be happening at all. It's been called a Hamas surrender deal, certainly by people on the far right inside Israel, but we are expecting this to happen sometime, perhaps in the next hour, perhaps longer. 90 prisoners to be released. And then, of course, if the ceasefire deal holds, this pattern will repeat itself in 7 days' time, the release of another 3 hostages. Remember, depending on the what type of hostage is released, 30 hostages for a female, 30 prisoners for a female hostage and 50 prisoners for a female soldier hostage. So the numbers might change each week, but overall, if this deal goes through for 6 weeks, we're expecting more than 1,700 prisoners to be released in all.
Alex Rossi monitoring events there outside that prison where those Palestinian prisoners are soon to be freed. Alex, thank you. Well, joining me here in Hostages Square is our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. And Alistair, you've watched with me the day unfolding, the failed start to the ceasefire deal, the bombardment again of Gaza, and now 3 young women back with their mothers in Israel.
The day here started pretty quiet. It started with anticipation that quickly turned to concern and uncertainty as that ceasefire deal was delayed. Hamas had not given the 3 names to Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu ordered that the Israeli fight in Gaza continued, and we saw smoke rising above parts of Gaza as the Israeli military continued to strike it. But that hurdle was quickly overcome, and that might give the mediators and others confidence going forward that almost certainly will be more hiccups along the way. But every time that they can be overcome, it builds confidence, not trust, but some confidence on both sides that this fragile ceasefire can stick. Hamas has said tonight that they are committed to it if Israel is. But the atmosphere that was uncertain this morning has turned, frankly, to celebration and joy this afternoon and this evening. They watched, you can hear it, on live Israeli television on a big screen in the square with a lot of Israel's top television anchors broadcasting from here those moments when those 3 young women in those chaotic scenes in Gaza came out of a van used by Hamas and rushed across to the waiting Red Cross Jeep. And that was the first moment that Israel had seen these 3 young women. It was the first moment that even their families would have realized they were still alive. And then the short journey, 20 minutes, half an hour from Gaza City to the border and into the custody of the Israeli Defense Forces. The first moment, I'm sure, that they would have felt truly safe in 471 days, and a moment when they finally saw their mothers, their 3 mothers who had gathered there, they'd been taken there by the Israeli military to be there when their daughters came out of Gaza. A moment to see a familiar face, to see a relative that has been fighting so hard for their release for so long. That moment then, we're watching again when the 3 mothers were watching on a phone themselves, their daughters being handed over. And now the process of transferring them into medical care to a hospital not far from where we are, about half an hour up the road, a big medical complex. And then the next stage of this process, the next stage of their recovery, what could be a very long stage for them. But the Israeli authorities have learnt from November 2023, when they received many hostages in a deal then. They've tweaked the system, they've tweaked their processes. They will want to keep them away from the media. They'll want to keep them away from the public as they recover in some privacy.
You picked up on the fact that for the first time their mothers are seeing their children, their daughters alive, and that is a critical point because there is no certainty that other hostages freed in this round of 33 or in future rounds to come, phase 2, will be alive, and this is why it's so traumatic for those families who've waited for so long.
We didn't know. I was speaking to very close family members of them throughout the day. I was speaking to members of the Hostage and Family Forum, and they said, well, we don't know whether they're alive or dead. The assumption was the first to come out would be alive, but that was just an assumption. That was speculation. So it wasn't until they exited that Hamas van in that scrum in Gaza City that we knew for the first time they weren't just alive, they were able to stand as well, they were able to walk. That doesn't necessarily tell us much about their physical condition, it tells us nothing about their mental condition, but it does tell them that they are in a condition where they are able to walk on their own 2 feet, and they will now be in the excellent medical care of Israeli doctors here. So, you know, such a big moment, not just for the families of those 3 young women, and not just for their relatives and their friends around the world, but a really big moment for Israeli society as well, because everybody you speak to in Israel over the last year and a half will have told you that they cannot begin to move on as a nation, as a society, until all of the hostages are out. I've spoken to released hostages. I've spoken to their close relatives. How do you feel? Well, I feel delighted I'm out, but I can't really feel a true sense of relief and freedom and celebration as long as others remain in Gaza. So the trauma for the nation will continue, but today will have helped a lot.
Well, we've just received, I have to say, a joyous photograph, which is of Emily Damari alongside her mum Mandy talking there to her brother. The family reunited via Zoom, I guess, certainly. But there we are, a smiling face of Emily. You know, how wonderful to see her looking so well, Alistair.
Yeah, and you know, we have spoken about what sort of condition they might be in, and we don't know, but there's obviously a real fear that after 15 and a half months in captivity, in a Gaza Strip that has been so heavily bombarded by the Israeli military, we know how the Gazan people have suffered under that bombardment. We know how the people of Gaza have suffered through a lack of humanitarian aid, through a lack of food and a lack of water. No doubt the same applies to the hostages who have been held there. And so nobody knew what kind of condition and state they would be when they come out. But Emily there in the green jumper with a big smile on her face next to her mother, well, I think that will be an image that comes to great relief to all involved.
Such an emotional moment, certainly, I have to say, and I've had a number of people who I've spoken to this afternoon who have been in tears, not least, in fact, David Mensa as well. So let's listen to what David Mensa had to say to me.
It's not a deal which we're delighted about because we're releasing terrorists with blood on their hands.
Well, a young teenager is one of them, to be fair. I doubt if that person is and most of them are women. So perhaps not in this first phase.
Indeed. There's been a corresponding
and some
price.
of them have been picked up sitting in their cars waiting at a checkpoint. You know, so has there been, as the Palestinian Prisoners Society told me yesterday in Bethlehem when I went there, has there been a policy of revenge against the Palestinian people in the West Bank and East Jerusalem because of October the 7th?
So frankly, that's an offensive assertion. This is a democratic government that lives by the rule of law. We have an independent judiciary. You might have heard that this is, there's a big issue here in Israel. So frankly, that is an offensive comment. We have a police force, a legal system where we take law and order extremely seriously. So look, when Israel apprehends people on suspicion of terrorism or after having committed real crimes, then they go through due process. Okay, this is the only democracy in hundreds of miles in any direction. Okay, so that sort of assertion to us is absolutely not.
So are you suggesting that those people who've been taken from Gaza and held, no one seems to know, have they gone through due process as well?
Well, look, we've taken a lot of people, a lot of Hamas people, suspected Hamas people, as prisoner. But that's been very, very important because they've shared with us a lot of information. We wanted to get information out of them to see when is the next terrorist attack, where our hostages are, give us the strength of Hamas. And so that's been very, very important. And also, let's not forget, Israel did not expect this war. Okay, we weren't ready to take on tens of thousands of Hamas prisoners. So each of them will go through due process. It's our duty as a democratic country and a duty we take very, very seriously.
So we're watching pictures of her jail right now where there will be that release as part of this prisoner exchange. You are confirming that those who have been taken from Gaza, we've seen some of them stripped naked, sat in the streets, have we not? You're confirming they will go through due process.
So if they've been stripped naked, it's because we worry that they have a suicide belt on them. Okay, we've got no interest. Gazans are not going anywhere, Israelis are not going anywhere. Ultimately, we will have to live together. But it's our duty to make sure, it's our duty to the Israeli people to make sure that terrorists are apprehended and arrested and there's due process.
Yes, we're just watching pictures now of the Israel-Gaza border. It is at the Reem crossing, I understand, that we're expecting to see perhaps some of the pictures as the women are handed over. And how important is it that they managed to meet their mothers who've flown down to see them so quickly?
Look, Israel has been waiting for this moment for many, many months now, 15 months now. I've been in touch with some of the hospitals, Beilinson and Sheba Hospital. Both of them have been doing everything they can to get the system ready to receive them and to give them every possible care. That's psychological care, medical care, and of course to facilitate their families as well.
Let's show you then the pictures of those mothers waiting at that reception point that the IDF has set up. There they are crowding around. Let's just watch that moment. What an amazing moment for them, because what you have to understand about all the families is they do not know if their loved one is alive, and this is the first proof of life in 15 months that they finally can see that their daughters are safe and sound, as Daniel Hagari put it.
So incredibly emotional scenes for Israelis, excuse me. There are incredibly emotional scenes because all of us here in Israel, this is an open wound in our society. Okay. Look, Israel's government, to its credit, have done everything in our power to bring these people home. Let's not lose sight for a moment that they were taken by jihadists, a jihadist terrorist organization that, to be honest, hate their own people, maybe even more than they hate Israelis. They've tried to maximize the number of deaths amongst their own people. They say it very, very clearly. But also, their ambition was to wipe this country off the face of the earth. 15 months on, at a very heavy price, we are stronger, we are more united, we are more settled, and we look forward to a brighter, more peaceful future in this neighborhood.
David Mensa speaking to me a short time ago, very emotional for him watching some of those pictures. Another emotional one certainly has been released. Let's show you this picture then of Emily Damari with her mother saying hello to her brother, and a very happy Emily, certainly, you know, alongside her mum Mandy, who'd flown down to the south of Israel to greet her daughter after 15 months of captivity. Well, I'm joined now by the Chief Executive of the Jewish Leadership Council, Claudia Mendoza. Your reaction then, Claudia, to what we've seen today?
It's tremendous, really. This, I think, is a moment of celebration and relief, but with a bit of anticipation about what might happen next. We have been waiting for 15 months for this news. I have met the family of Emily Damari. Her mother has been on a campaign for the last 15 months to make sure that Emily can come home safely. And so to see that picture of them together, smiling, happy, reunited, is an unbelievable moment for Israelis and for the Jewish community globally.
And how wonderful to see Emily looking so happy. I have to say there is another photograph we've seen where she has received damage, it looks like, to her hand. But considering we didn't know what condition they'd be in, what's your reaction seeing her smiling there?
Yeah, I think the last few days have been really fraught, very traumatic, because we knew that there would be hostages released, but we had no idea up until very recently who they would be and what state they would be in, even if they were alive. So I cannot imagine how the families have been feeling, not knowing what state they would be in. So to see her alive, to see the other two alive, and to see them reunited with their families, I just feel utter joy.
Does it give you hope for the return of the other hostages? More families we know are going through such an excruciating wait.
Excruciating is the right word. But I think if we haven't got hope, we have nothing. Over the last 15 months, I haven't known what we would find. So to know that they have come home alive today is amazing. But there's a lot of trepidation about the state of the next set of hostages and what they will look like.
And clearly, even today, there was a hiccup. The names of the hostages, because of a technical field reason, Hamas said, had not been revealed to the Israelis. As you say, plenty more steps to come. And this frustration with having to wait a week between each hostage handover. One suggestion earlier today that possibly it would be 4 hostages freed next week. But why is there, do you think, such a delay week by week before people are freed?
I think this is part of Hamas's game to keep the tension high, to show that in this respect they have the upper hand. Israelis and Jews globally will be celebrating that hostages have been released, but they know that with that there comes a lot of other issues. The so-called prisoner swap is not a prisoner swap. These are hostages for people who have murdered scores and scores of Israelis who are serving life sentences. And we know that for every hostage released, we are going to be having these people free in the region, and who knows what crimes they will commit in the future.
Yes, I think today it will be mainly women and children who are released, but clearly high-value hostages are part of this deal. We know that 328 have been handed life sentences in the total of 735 Palestinians who will be freed from the West Bank and East Jerusalem, not including any returned to Gaza. We just had some pictures in, actually, from the medical centre where the hostages are due to be taken to. Sheba Hospital in Ramat Gan, helicopters carrying the hostages are expected to arrive there. How important is it now that they're given the time and the space to receive what treatment they need, be it for medical conditions or to deal with the trauma that they have seen and suffered?
I think seen that they are home and they are safe and they look well as can be. I think it's really important that they are given the time to spend with their family, to catch up on those 15 months that they've missed, and to make sure that they have all the time that they need to recover, as you say, physically and mentally. It's going to be a very, very long road to recovery, and I wish them all the best.
Claudia Mendoza, Chief Executive of the Jewish Leadership Council. Thank you very much indeed. Well, you're watching pictures there from the West Bank, from Offa prison. Looks like the Palestinian prisoners may be on the move, or at least the security surrounding them. Lots of activity there. So let's bring in Yossi Mecklenburg, Senior Consulting Fellow at the Middle East North Africa Programme at Chatham House. And this clearly is a critical part of the ceasefire deal, welcomed by Palestinian families. Obviously, many in Israel find it very difficult to watch.
Good evening. Yeah, it is difficult, but this is part of the deal. And in order to see the hostages coming back home, returning home, Israel had to release Palestinian prisoners. I think this happened many times before. And I think to those who criticize this, I think, including within the Israeli government, they should remember that had Israel actually, and if this government was prepared for October 7, we would not have been in this situation. This situation derives from the failure to protect its own people on October 7. Let alone, I mean, some Israel's prisoners, some of them are in administrative arrest, some of them are minors, some women. It's for a range of activities. Among them, people that actually have blood on their hands and committed terrible terrorist atrocities.
I suppose the difficulty for people here in Israel, that the biggest handover like this before October the 7th was in 2011. You might remember it, the handover after the release of Gilad Shalit, who'd been taken in a cross-border raid through tunnels down in Gaza, held in Gaza by Hamas for 5 years. And as part of that, 1,000 Palestinians were freed, including one, Yahya Sinwar, widely seen, of course, as the architect of October the 7th.
Well, yes, that's correct. And I think, but not necessarily we learn the right lessons from this. The problem is not only the release of the prisoner. The problem is the lack of political horizon. One side of it is containing terrorism, containing militancy. This is one side. But if there is no political horizon, this actually encourages militancy, not to justify anything that Hamas did. What Hamas did on October 7, the massacre, is inexcusable and unforgivable. At the same time, the lesson for it is not to allow conflicts to fester, not to try to manage the conflict, but to resolve it. Because the idea is not only containing terrorists, arrest them, even kill them, it's how to create hope for the rest of the people of Gaza in the West Bank, that they won't be attracted to extreme ideas and extreme movements. And I think this trick has been missing for a very long time. Let's remember, it was Benjamin Netanyahu himself as prime minister that allowed for all this money to come into the coffers of Hamas, because he tried to avert the two-state solution. He wanted to keep the Fatah and Hamas separated, and divided. And I think this is the lesson to be learned. As for counter-terrorism and counter-radicalization, yeah, this will have to take place too.
Well, we know that the outgoing US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, revealed earlier this week his blueprint for the future, which he will hand over to the incoming Trump administration, one of which was that the Palestinian Authority would govern Gaza. Obviously, for Israel, Hamas is unacceptable in leadership there. Would that be difficult then if Netanyahu remains prime minister in this country? Do you think the Palestinian Authority governing Gaza?
I think nothing is going to be easy after this 15 months. I think it will take very long time to recover. Let's not delude ourselves. We are in the very, very early stages of all this process. Even completing phase 1 is not going to be easy, let alone phase 2, and then moving to phase 3, which is the reconstruction of Gaza. In my mind, there is no doubt that at the end of the day, the government of Netanyahu that is responsible for the fiasco, for the great failure of 7th of October, and the way the war is conducted should go. It's not only me saying that. Every public opinion poll in Israel says that. Most Israeli supporters this deal a long time ago, and there was a similar or almost identical agreement on the table back in May, and this could have saved many lives of hostages and, of course, of Palestinians. So yes, there is a need for a change of leadership on both sides. But at the end of the day, also elections are long overdue for the PA, and Gaza and the West Bank should be governed by the same body. This separation is artificial and doesn't serve the cause of coexistence, not the cause of peace. And this is one of the first moves towards moving away from this horrendous conflict.
You said what Gaza needs is hope. Is it too late for that now? 90% of homes damaged or destroyed, half the hospitals not functioning, 42 million tons of rubble, 15 years of reconstruction. You know, how do you find hope when you're presented with that scenario?
If we lose hope, what's the alternative? And, we here in Europe know that after great devastation, there is also an opportunity for renewal. And that's the choices we are there. Or, accept that there is no resort to pessimism and believing that there is no hope, there is nothing, there is no light at the end of this tunnel, and this is a very dark tunnel in more than one way. Or to take this situation and look at it and believe in humanity, believe in human beings, and start showing to the people of Gaza, and by the way, also the people of Israel after they also suffered from trauma, and the people of the West Bank, that there is a different way. Because if there won't be a different way, I'm afraid we'll go back to war and conflict. We see how conflicts can last for a very long time, either here or here in the sense of Israel and Palestine and in other places. But there is no doubt in my mind that you can build with the right approach a hope. You need the international community to be invested in it, to see that the money is coming. I think that the right programs, there are enough international organizations with lots of experience and how to move from such a devastating situation into something better. But yes, it will take a long time, and the people there need to be convinced that it's possible.
While you're talking, we're still watching pictures from just outside Offa prison, looking towards the West Bank. The names of those who are to be freed have been listed. 69 female prisoners, we're told, is part of the handover today, 21 male. 2 17-year-olds, one male, one female, and the youngest, we're told as well, is a 15-year-old boy from East Jerusalem. Certainly the Palestinians feel that the Israelis have been picking people up in revenge for October the 7th, that conditions in jail have become harder too in revenge for October the 7th. I put that to David Mencer, the Israeli government spokesman, who denied that and suggested to me that those who'd been taken from Gaza, their families don't know where to, will go through due process. Is this another source of tension between Israeli and Palestinian people? Well, we'll no doubt see pictures later of celebrations on the West Bank when some of these return home, celebrations that the Israelis certainly did not want to see published today.
I think that, at the end of the day, there are two societies that are very much divided. And, what is said for one side is celebration for the other side. And that's exactly the point when things need to change in a positive way. It's, at the end of the day, a real peace built on also truth and reconciliation, and try to understand the other society. There will be people that rejoice today. There will be people that think that, there are unnecessary risks. But again, this is part of this process in any conflict. And unfortunately, in times of war, some of the things that are each other doing is nasty, is tragic. But again, there is a human capacity to move away from that. And today, maybe it's just the first step forward.
Absolutely. A step most certainly has been taken. Yossi Mecklenburg from Chatham House, thank you very much indeed for your time. But we'll certainly keep an eye on those pictures from off the prison in the West Bank. But let's just show you another photograph that we have received of Emily Damari alongside her mother, Mandy, holding up her hand to her brother and his family. And as you can quite clearly see, Emily sustained damage to her hand. We certainly know that she was shot in the hand on the 7th of October. So after 15 months, that injury is still quite clear to see. Questions perhaps about the treatment that she received or the quality of the care that she was given. Let's get reaction then from Alistair Bunkle, who joins me now, smiling, and the reaction of her family. You know, they've got their hands, across their face, watching her injury there.
Yeah, it looks freshly bandaged. She would have been given immediate medical care, as they all would have done, as soon as they reached Israeli-controlled territory. They would have been met by doctors. So I'm guessing, but it looks as though she'd probably immediately had some medical attention on her left hand. It looks from that image as though two of her middle fingers are missing. As you say, we know that she was shot when she was taken on October the 7th. We do also know from the past that hostages taken into Gaza, some of them were taken to hospital in Gaza on October the 7th or the days afterwards. So it looks like she might have had some degree, we don't know how much, maybe limited, some medical care in Gaza as well. But, Emily Damari, that's a sort of slightly bittersweet photo, isn't it? She's looking happy. Hey, look, she's slightly styling it out, but also the injuries that she sustained when she was taken on that day when so many people didn't survive, and many of those that were taken into Gaza, who are still in Gaza, we know went in with injuries. Many of them were shot when they went in. Some of them, I think of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who lost his arm when he was taken on October the 7th. But Emily Damari there, in that still of a FaceTime video that she's having with her family, showing her bandaged left hand and what appears to be two of her middle fingers missing from it.
And indeed, we know another of those who was free today, Romi Gonen, now 24 years old, was also shot. She was on the phone to her mother, trying to flee the Nova Music Festival. She was in the car with friends, we know. She told her mother at 10:15 in the morning that they'd been shot and she was bleeding. They shot me, Mum, and I'm bleeding. Everyone in the car is bleeding. And when the car was later found, it was empty. And clearly, Romi, one of those taken hostage. So two of those freed today, we know, had been shot on October the 7th.
And those phone calls to their parents, to their relatives, the last time that anybody had heard from them, their pleas for help and to be saved as gunfire was going on and explosions were going on around them. And that would have been the last time that her mother would have heard from her before she went into Gaza on October the 7th until today. And they come out, and we've seen them come out walking from one car into another car, into a car controlled by the International Red Cross. They are now, as we've said, receiving that medical attention. We haven't had confirmation that they have arrived at the hospital near here in Ramat Gan, but they will be taken, we understand, airlifted to hospital here for further medical treatment.